Come on, give it your all. You've come a long way, but let me just say, faking it's not so.
Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff for 2022, new year, new season. Sean, this is our 11th season of the Weekly Stuff Podcast, the 11th year we've been doing this, and it is the 10th anniversary year of the podcast, which means all year we will be building up to our extremely special 10th anniversary episode, which will be June 13th, 2022. How does that make you feel, Sean?
Ancient. Dead. You know, like, it's a thing where you say, like, oh, it's season 11. I'm like, well, we're now, if you count the 2 extra seasons, we're now as long as the X-Files. And that's only if you count the 2 extra ones. We're 2 years past the original X-Files run, which for whatever reason in my head is what I think of as, like, that's a good long TV run. And this is a lot of podcasts we've done.
It's a lot of podcasts. This is episode 410. There have been a lot of these. There's going to be a lot more. I am looking forward to the new year of podcasting. I don't know if I'm looking forward to the new year of anything else, but, you know, yeah.
Hey, at least it's a cool name. It's a good number, 2022. Yeah. Like, that's a cool... It sounds like we're in, like, a Mega Man game or some shit. But yes, I don't expect, like, the world is not suddenly going to get really bright and cheerful because it's like, oh, we got a good, situation to match the fun number that we're on right now.
I wish we were in a Mega Man game. At least then we'd have a cool robot running around trying to save us, you know?
Yeah. The robot apocalypse is a way cooler than the, like, disease apocalypse.
The disease and, like, authoritarian incompetence, like,
yes.
Apocalypse is, it's a bad one.
Please just replace my arm with a giant laser gun is what I would like if we're going to go to a hell future.
That sounds good to me. So we will be, on today's episode, we will be talking about the top 10 games of 2021. This is usually how we kick off or end our year in podcasting. This year, we're kicking it off with our 10 favorite games from the past year. Interesting year for games. I think we'll give our overall impressions later on, but... I was surprised I was able to have a top 10 actually relatively easily. Even though I think you and I would both agree this was not the most maybe exciting year for games ever.
Yeah, it definitely is a thing where my number 1 was very easy, my number 2 was very easy, and then once I figured out my 10 was easy, and then basically like 3 through 9 are like all the like, this is a really, really good game, but it's not like one of the best games I've ever played kind of game. So it became very interchangeable. Like, this is probably, like, in terms of my list, one of the most, like, the order doesn't really matter for the bulk of the list I've ever done.
Interesting. Yeah, I like my list. I like the 10 quite a bit, but I would probably agree there's, like, I would say the top 5 or 6, I would say the top 7 are very, very strong. The bottom 3 are ones I could imagine falling off the list in other years. And then I have split mine because it's increasingly becoming hard to figure out how you cover games when games last a long time. So I have a top 10 that is strictly the games of 2021 that came out and are new this year. And then I have another top 5 that is games of not quite 2021. Games that either were continuing something or were re-released or released on a certain platform this year or something like that. That's kind of how I split the baby there.
Yeah, what I did is I made an executive decision for my list to allow any games that I specifically didn't play last year that came out last year because I knew there was a PS5 version coming out this year. There are 2 games that happened with, and I just said, fuck it, they're just on this list because that's the reason why I never played them last year. And so that's kind of, I think, a little bit my version of that.
Sean, I just quickly want to go back to, like, I think it's 2013. There's an episode where I did that with Hotline Miami, where I had it on my top 10 because the year before it had come out exclusively on PC. I didn't have a PC. That year, 2013, it came out on everything else, consoles and everything else. And that's when I played it. And so I put on my top 10. And you railed against me for like 20 minutes on that fucking episode. So I just want to say, we have like reversed on this. And I don't bemoan you doing that at all. I just think you're a filthy hypocrite.
I literally have no recollection of that whatsoever. It clearly was a thing that happened that didn't matter to me in any way whatsoever. I do remember, it's nowhere near as bullshit as, was it last year that you put like Fire Emblem 2 on your list or whatever because it technically got its first English language release?
That was 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, no, I did. Yeah, that counts.
Yeah, so yeah, so it's sometimes there's some wiggle room with that kind of stuff on this list, because I will say if I didn't do that with my list, we would be in a very Halo 5 situation where my number 10 game would be a game that was on the list because I literally only played 10 games released strictly in the calendar year of 2021.
That is fair. So we will do all of that later. That'll be our main topic and everything this week. I do have stuff that I've been doing, but it's stuff I'm either is on this list and we're going to talk about, or we're saving for a future episode. Like, I am now 50 hours. I crossed the 50 hours mark in Persona 5 Royal, which means I'm maybe almost halfway through, kind of. It's a long-ass game. I'm loving it. It's phenomenal. I had the thought, Sean, at a certain point with Royal, it might have even been when I was, like, in Mementos, and Mementos is an area that they've subtly but vastly improved in Royal.
Yeah.
And, like, I still have not seen the vast majority of what's new in Persona 5 Royal, because that's mostly near the end of the game. I've seen Kasumi's social link, I've seen Maruki the Counselor, I've seen the first half of both of their social links, but other than that, it's a lot of the little nips and tucks and things like that. And I still had a feeling the other day, and I think it was when I was in Mementos, where I just stopped and said, this might be the best game ever made. Like, just on a pure, like, the critic in me looking at it, like, this just might be the best game ever made, because you took one of the most ridiculously polished, perfect games ever in Persona 5 and found ways to miraculously polish it even more. And I don't know what that is. It's like if you fucking took Citizen Kane and somehow made it better 5 years later. Like, what the heck have you done? It's a crazy achievement.
Yeah, that's very much how I felt while playing it. Also, was like where you didn't ever feel like playing Persona 5 that there was anything that it felt unpolished or anything like that. But there is just like so many little tiny things that they do around the edges of that game. That it's just you can tell how much that team was smart in looking back at like Persona 5 and figuring out where is the space for them to be able to like add things or alter things and improve things. And it's just like you can tell how well they know that game, right? There's a very clear-eyed vision of what Persona 5 was that you need in order to make the kinds of improvements that they did for Royal.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of my stuff. I think your stuff is also in the bounds of the top 10.
Yes, I spent a lot of I've spent almost the entire time since we've last recorded a podcast in terms of my free time playing Tales of Arise, and it might pop up on my list. So
we'll find out.
We'll talk about it there if it is. If not, apparently I'll never talk about the game on the podcast. So
if not, you really hated that fucking thing to like grind through it that fast only to not put it on your top 10. Yeah. Man, that's an epic level of hate for a game.
So we'll find out.
Anyway, Sean. I do have 2 quick pieces of housekeeping. One is just to notice that I'm still hanging out at my parents' place before I go back to Iowa. I've been here for the holidays. I extended my stay a little bit because of some health things. Everyone's fine, just helping out with some stuff. So if the sound just sounds a little different this week, or if you hear dogs barking or whatever, that's what that is. And finally, we do have a new schedule for the Weekly Stuff podcast's release. You and I are not changing the time we record, but we will be changing the release time of the Weekly Stuff podcast. I actually started this a couple weeks ago kind of to pilot it, and I like how this has been going. So officially, in 2022 and beyond, the podcast is moving from its very long-standing Monday release to a Tuesday release. So to all podcast platforms, whether you get on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, it's on everything. That'll be a Tuesday morning, 12 a.m. Central release, so midnight Central on Tuesdays. That's when the podcast goes wide everywhere. But there will also be a YouTube premiere on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Central, so a couple hours before the wide Tuesday release, and that'll be the first place you can listen to new episodes. Mainly for me, this is just because I think a couple weeks ago we had a Weekly Suit Gundam that was so stupidly long. I think it was Iron Blooded Orphan Season 2, and it was so long that when we finished, Sean, I looked at it and I said, I I cannot possibly get this done tonight. Like, just the amount of editing and everything required, I couldn't get it done. So I said, okay, this one's going to be coming out Monday night / Tuesday morning. And then I did that, and it felt really good for, like, my mental health, and, like, I think it made for a slightly better product in the end, because I was able to do a little more with it, and I was just like, man, this feels awesome. And I just thought, well, I can do this for everything. There's no law that says this has to be out mere hours after it's recorded. It'll still be out mere hours after it's recorded, but, like, 12, not 2. And overall, I just think that'll be fun, because I think the YouTube premieres are often fun. We have people in the comments. It gives us, like, it's cool to be able to say the podcast airs Monday nights at 7. That's a cool thing. And then the Tuesday release wide on everything. It'll be there when you wake up Tuesday, or if you live somewhere else in the world and just the timing works differently, it'll be out at that time for you. So it doesn't change much on anyone else's end, but it sure makes me happier. So that is my official announcement of the new schedule of the Weekly Stuff podcast for season 11.
Yeah, I was very impressed when you managed to get that past the shadowy studio executives that actually make this podcast. I thought that they were so adamant about that Sunday release. It's like, no, fuck it.
You know, we never talked about being bought by AT&T several years ago when they were just buying up everything. But yeah, those people were assholes. I'm really glad they're spinning us off with Time Warner and Discovery now.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that this is a smart change, and it is that thing where it's like, it is that, because I definitely, get that thing in a lot of other places in my life of where there isn't a, like, strict deadline, and you just get very stubborn about something you set for yourself, and then eventually it stops working, and you're like, why am I so fucking, like, insistent upon this thing that no longer makes any sense for me? So yeah, I think this is a good change.
Thank you. All right, sounds good. Sean, do you want to do our dive into our top 10?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do it.
All right. So how do we want to do this? Do you have any... Can I do my top 5 of Not Quite 2021 at the start, just to get those out of the way?
Yeah, and I've got 2 honorable mentions that I want to do, so I'll do that after you do your
okay
fancy second list you've made.
My fancy second list. This is just a side list to, like, make it easier for me to think about all of this stuff. So yeah, my top 5 of Not Quite 2021. My number 5 is going to be Mario Party Superstars. This is the new Mario Party that came out this year that is made of old Mario Party pieces. I played this over the last month or so while my brother was here, and because if you don't have someone to play Mario Party with, you're just a sad person playing Mario Party on your own with computers, and I don't know who does that. But Mario Party Superstars is a game that all the minigames are taken from the classic Mario Parties 1 through 7, so the N64 and GameCube games, and the boards are taken from N64 games. And so it's basically just a Mario Party with all the best Mario Party stuff from the past in it. I don't think it's enough to call it a new game, and I don't think it would have made my top 10 if I were considering it as just a new game, but it is a super solid Mario Party. It's very fun to play. It's got lots of nice options, like you can pick when you start a game like a mini-games pack, so you can say, I just want N64 games, I just want GameCube games, I just want, like, this kind of action game, all of that. You can, of course, go in and just play all your mini games. You can pick which kinds of bonus stars are going to be on. And overall, it looks nice. It's a very nice sort of, redo. Obviously, it's not remastered. It's from the ground up rebuilt, all of that stuff. And it looks nice. It plays nice. If you like Mario Party, you would like Mario Party Superstars. It also, and I have not tried this yet, but it does have online functionality for the first time in Mario Party. So you can play your games online remotely, and that is cool. And I don't know why Mario Party didn't have that before now, but it does have it now, and that is nice. So that is my number 5 game of Not Quite 2021.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of live streams of people playing Mario Party, because it's always a fun format. If there's people online that you like to watch play games, it's always very funny. And it has been interesting watching some of those videos and remembering, like, particularly for Mario Parties 1, 2, and 3, which I played a lot as a kid because it was the N64 ones. It is, like, surreal seeing some of those mini games and being like, and I have more nostalgia for that than I think I realized, just because I haven't played Mario Party type stuff in a very long time. And it's cool that they brought it back, and that it is, like, because this was something I was very confused by, it is classic style Mario Party. It's not the kind of revamped version they did for Super Mario Party. So
no,
so it is, like, fully trying to, like, sort of remaster that classic Mario Party experience.
Yes, and it's the first thing I did when I played this, when I got this game, is I put the cartridge in my Nintendo Switch, and I loaded up mini games, and I played all 3 versions of Bumper Balls. They're all in there. I love Bumper Balls, and the nice thing about the mini games too, and I think this is what increases the nostalgia, is because it's collecting from all these different games. It's just good mini games. They don't have to have all the filler, so you'll have all this nostalgia like, oh man, these games were great, because you're not seeing all the mini games that were just fucking horse shit.
Yes, which there were a lot of them. And then also, I have to imagine, presumably the controls for a lot of them are probably a lot better than they were.
Yes, they are.
Some of those N64 minigames controlled like complete shit because you're using the N64 controller, and they had to design controls for like 50 different minigames.
Yes, it was bad. All right, my number 4 game of Not Quite 2021 is Super Mario 3D World. It was remastered this year on the Nintendo Switch. This is like the least new of anything on this list, because it's really just the Wii U game on Nintendo Switch, but they did add a couple of things. Like, they moved up your base movement speed in the game, which I cannot describe how much of a game changer that is, because now you do not have to hold down the button to run 100% of the time you are playing Mario 3D World. That was a holdover from Mario 3D Land that they inexplicably didn't change for the Wii U sequel, 3D World. Anyway, it's basically the Wii U game with a couple of nice nips and tucks, and I had played that whole Wii U game, but playing it again on Switch, reminded me this is just it's not one of the best absolute Mario games ever made, but it's a really, really solid one. I really like it a lot. It was definitely outshined by the game it came packaged with, which we'll be talking about later on my main top 10. But in terms of games of Not Quite 2021, I put a lot of time into this one and had a lot of fun with it. Same with my number 3, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond. This was our Pokemon remake for the year, our remake of Diamond and Pearl, which I have talked about on here before, and I've talked about on Twitter. I feel like I'm a weird defender of these remakes, because they are definitely the most minimal remakes in a lot of ways that I was going to say Game Freak has ever done, but actually Game Freak outsourced these to a company called Ilka, did these remakes for Diamond and Pearl. And so they're fairly minimal in certainly the change in graphical style and a lot of gameplay elements. But the result of that is like a really solid nostalgia experience where they've made the improvements you want to have, like having the experience share and having some of the autosave and just the nice things you expect to have today in an RPG, but with sort of the classical structure of a Pokemon game, which Diamond and Pearl were sort of the last before Game Freak started to get pretty experimental with it, with Black and White and the games that came after that. And so I think it was a nice throwback that I put in more time than I realized. I played over 40 hours of this thing. I did beat the game. I haven't done all of the end game stuff, but I had a hell of a lot of fun with it. This was one of the most surprising games I got this year, in terms of buying a game, not even necessarily expecting to play the whole thing, and really sinking a lot of time into it. This was one of my favorite experiences of the year. I actually really, really like the chibi art style. I think it's very cute, and I think there's a lot more interesting visual stuff they do than I think people have given the game credit for. The music is also gorgeous. Unless you're one of those weird people who gets on Dragon Quest forums and complains about MIDI music, you won't like this because it's MIDI. But I also think you need to get a life. Pokemon Brilliant Diamond, I liked it. My number 3 game, not quite of 2021.
Cool.
All right. Number 2, this is a game I suspect is on your top 10 based on the rules you laid out. Yakuza Like a Dragon. Phenomenal game. I will probably just wait until you talk about it so I can share in the glory of it with you. We did an episode on it and all of that, obviously. Yakuza Like a Dragon is one of the best... I was going to say one of the best RPGs. It is one of the best JRPGs I've ever played. It's just one of the best games I've ever played. It's the only Yakuza game I've played so far, and it's a great one if you have not played other Yakuzas. It's a very, very good intro to the series if you do not want to have to play 7 games before it, because there's 1 through 6 and 0. So, yes, this is the 8th mainline Yakuza game. But man, I think the main characters in this game are just some of my favorite characters ever, and... goddamn, I love it. For whatever reason, I had trouble considering it alongside the games of 2021 because it was technically a 2020 game, and it just felt like part of a different cultural conversation to me. But it's a game not quite of 2021, and it's the second best I played this year, with the first being Genshin Impact, which... I have no idea how to consider Genshin Impact for the main top 10. I saw a lot of people doing like Genshin Impact, but 2.0 specifically, which makes sense because that was the new stuff this year. But I played all of Genshin Impact this year because you put it as your number 1 of 2020, And I think that was our first podcast we did for 2021. And I think like immediately after recording that, I went and started playing Genshin Impact. And I think I've played over 200 hours of it this year. I have played a shit ton of Genshin Impact. I've played pretty much everything there is to do in the game up until maybe a month or two ago when I kind of went cold turkey on it again so I could do some other stuff. And I have had a great year playing Genshin Impact. It is a majestic, masterful game that we have spent probably an annoying amount of time talking about on this show. But it is, I think, one of the games that you look at and most feels like a glimpse into the future of gaming. It's a game that feels next gen, not technologically, although the PS5 version is really good. But next gen in terms of like, it's a breakthrough in game design in mixing sort of your open world style that we've been with for a long time with the best parts of gacha games into this, you know, character-driven, story-driven, but absolutely beautiful, immersive, open-world thing with, you know, consistently, surprisingly deep combat, more mechanics added seemingly every day, more characters than you can possibly love. It's so good, and it's, you know, not quite a game of 2021. We'll be talking about it in the 2022 episode also, but it deserves a mention probably every year it is this good. So that's my number one of not quite 2021.
Very, very well deserved.
Yeah. So there you go. Those are mine. Sean, do you have some honorable mentions for us?
Yes, I've got two honorable mentions. One that I want to shout out is, you know, definitely not a game that in any way came out in 2021, but I played so much of it that it felt weird not to mention would be the Master Chief Collection. This is a game that I basically bought a fucking box for. I spent $300 because my Xbox One died, and goddamn it, I just wanted to play some fucking Halo. And I spent a lot of time replaying through all of the old Halo campaigns in the Master Chief Collection, you know, which, like, at this point, it had been so long since I touched that thing that they had added ODST and Reach, so you can play all of it other than Halo 5, which you don't really want to replay Halo 5. I did, and you don't want to. And yeah, the Master Chief Collection, it is just, I think I said on a podcast several weeks ago, it's the most impressive collection of old games you can buy in terms of a remaster. There's like nothing even particularly close. And I think the thing I was most impressed by wasn't even like the campaigns, which are all awesome. You can play them at 60 frames per second with HDR and they're high resolution. I like they've added a bunch of good customization for controls and stuff like that you can fiddle with. That's really good. But it's the multiplayer stuff is the thing that impressed me the most. It's got like some of the most interesting and effective matchmaking I've ever seen in a multiplayer game, being able to go back and play classic Halo 3 multiplayer or Halo 1 multiplayer, Halo 2 multiplayer, Halo Reach multiplayer. If you really wanted to, you could play Halo 4 multiplayer. I really wouldn't, but you can. Theoretically, I have no idea. I'm very curious what the actual population of people playing Halo 4 multiplayer is on the Master Chief Collection. But theoretically, one could. But yeah, that's like some of the most fun I've had playing video games this year was just diving super deep back into the Halo pool, both the single player and the multiplayer. And I wasn't really expecting to like have the huge rush of nostalgia, and then also the realization that like those games, particularly Halo 3, are still like some of the best games ever made, that they hold up extremely well. The other honorable mention I want to mention, just because I feel bad that it's not on the list, just because I thought I was going to find a place for it and it ended up not making it, is Deathloop. For a very long time, Deathloop was my number 10. I had it in the back of my head of like, when I played that game, I put a memory in my head of like, remember how much fun you had in the whole middle section of the game. Because the ending of Deathloop is really bad, but just because the ending's really bad doesn't mean that the game is bad. And so I held on for as long as I could of like, no, you had a really good time for that whole middle stretch of that game. And it was really fun. And it just quite didn't make the list. It's basically my number 11 game would be Deathloop. I feel bad for it. But the ending was really bad. And so it just didn't quite make it. One day, you know, I'll get an immersive sim on one of these lists, but it's not today.
I just want to say I thought Deathloop was bad the whole time.
You played the opening of it, which is also rough.
I played the opening and I tried to get into the rest of it, and it was not for me. Which is fine. I'm glad some people liked it, although that's also a game that just completely fell off the year-end conversation, I think for the exact same reason you're talking about, Sean. You know, it just didn't come together, right?
Yeah, it just doesn't stick the landing, and it so poorly misses the landing that like it does sour in your memory the rest of that experience. Like if I could have stopped playing Deathloop at like the midpoint, it maybe actually would be my number 10. But because I didn't, and I actually played the whole game, and I think that's like what happened, right? It's one of those games that like when it was reviewed, it reviewed extremely well, and there was so much good word of mouth coming out of like early reviews and stuff. And I think it's like one of those, like if you like cram the whole game in really tight, it probably like feels a lot better because the whole experience is way more fresh for you. So I imagine it's the kind of game that like works really well for the review process, that then once it gets out to other people and they play at like a more normal pace where it takes you like a week to 2 weeks to actually play through the whole game, it's like at that pace the game, the flaws of the game are way more apparent, and it's like harder to kind of look past them, and it just ends up kind of dying on the vine in the more broad discussion in the public. And I feel bad because there is a lot of really cool stuff about Deathloop. Like I still do think it is a quite good game. I certainly wouldn't say that it's a bad game. But it didn't make the list.
I'm actually going to make an executive change on my list, Sean, and my number 10 is going to fall off and become an honorable mention, and my honorable mention is going to become my number 10.
Okay.
Because my number 10, and I had been thinking about doing this anyway, Sean, but what you saying about Deathloop, this is pretty much how I feel about this game. So I just want to shout out my honorable mention really quick.
Okay.
My honorable mention is It Takes Two, which is the game that won the Game Awards this year. And I think it's cool. I think it's cool that I won the Game Awards. It's a really impressive game. This was by far the hardest game on the list to rank. At a certain point playing it, I thought maybe this would be like my number 3 or 4. At a certain point, it was as low as just not being on the list, and now it is off the list as like my official number 11. Because I do think it's a game that's less than the sum of its parts. If you haven't seen It Takes Two, it's full co-op. You cannot play it alone, which is one of the cool things about it. And it is a game that story-wise is basically about a couple who are divorcing, and then a magical kind of racist book comes to life and forces them to reconcile by becoming toys and going through a series of platforming challenges. And I think the thing is, on one level, the game is like on the level of game design and level variety. So brilliant. It is so consistently inspired. It has some of the best level design I've seen in this or any other year, with this extra high wire act of all being exclusively designed around co-op. And the sheer variety of everything you do in the game, almost all of it ridiculously fun, all staying intuitive with this sort of clear set of basic controls. It's just a game design masterclass. It makes sense that this won the Game Awards given the group that votes on that. I think this is a game that other developers and a lot of critics would look at and go, oh my god, I can't believe this exists, because it is very impressive on that level. There's a whole part where you basically do a Diablo riff, where it like puts you in a Diablo isometric view kind of thing, and it's really cool. The game is constantly doing fun stuff like this. And I think it's also technically quite impressive. We played it all, my brother and I, on the Series S split screen on one TV, and it basically runs 60 FPS through all of that with just a couple of hitches, which is really crazy for a split screen game made today. That's a hard thing to do. And I think the art style is cool. I've basically described it as what if Leica, the people who did Coraline, made Toy Story. It kind of looks like that, and it is a very neat aesthetic. But at the same time, this game's writing vacillates between sort of cute and fun. There's a part where there's some squirrels who are trying to fight some bees who are like encroaching on their territory, and you help the squirrels because you're all shrunken down and small. That's really fun. That's cute and fun. And then I think there's some writing that is just absurdly and offensively terrible. I think there's a lot of confused tonality about this game. I think it falls into a trope I don't really like about divorce, which is that it's a personal failing between two people who just haven't worked at it hard enough. Not that maybe there's something toxic there, and like that could also be explored. It really falls into that trope that I think is like, it feels like it's from the 1990s. That feels like that's not how we write about divorce in 2021, and that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But also, but there's still a good story you could tell there. There's very much a good story to tell about two people who have fallen out of love but are able to fall back into love. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But I think its sense of relationship dynamics is this such simplistic, front of a magazine cover, faux insight, like, you have to have passion for yourself and your partner. You have to take time for each other. And there's this whole thing where, like, the husband is like, man, wife, you don't take any time for me. And she's like, I'm busy because you're a stay-at-home dad and I bring in all the money and my job is hard. And he's like, yeah, but still. And basically it comes down on the husband's side in that. And I wanted to slap the game in the face. Like, capitalism sucks, but that's not the mom's fault. There's just a lot of that. I don't think the game can ever quite decide if it is farce or if it is sincere. And Sean, have you seen any of this game played?
Yes, I've seen some clips, and I've what you're describing about the story is something like I heard on a podcast I listened to, someone like describing the story, and it gave me like hardcore 1990s made-for-TV movie vibes of that, like,
Yes.
kind of the way it deals with the divorce and the relationships. But yes, I've seen some like clips of the game being played and stuff, but I certainly haven't like watched a full playthrough or anything.
So have you seen the racist Spanish book that shouts at you for most of the game?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so there is the main conceit is that the daughter between the couple has a daughter named Rose, and she has like found a book at school called Dr. Hakim's Relationship Advice or something. I know the author is Dr. Hakim. And then the book comes to life and is what like puts the spell on the two, like the couple, and makes them into toys and all of this. But Dr. Hakim, which doesn't really sound like a Spanish name to me, is a faux Spanish accent book that like shouts at you in like, I'm not going to do the voice here because I don't want to get canceled, but it definitely the whole time I'm playing it is like, this can't be kosher, right? Because it is like the most, it's just a little on edge, and you can't take anything seriously that happens when that book is around. And I think if they just pushed to pure farce, maybe it works, but they don't. There's a lot that's meant to be sincere about actual relationships and aspirations for adult themes, when you have this character like at best the Dr. Hakim book is a character for 3-year-olds in like a cheap movie. Like, it's not a character for adults. But that's the problem with this game, I think, ultimately, is I don't think it can decide if it's a game for adults or for kids, because there are some genuinely weird, confused stretches of this game. There's this entire stretch of the game, Sean, where you are trying to get to the top of Rose's, the daughter's room, to find her favorite toy elephant, because your idea is that, well, Rose's tears, Rose crying is what turned us into toys because her sadness triggered the spell. So if we make her cry again, it will reverse the spell. And so the couple decides, well, the best way to reverse the spell is to make her cry again, and therefore we're going to find her favorite toy, which is this stuffed elephant, and we're going to fucking destroy it, and then she'll cry again. And it's like 4 hours of this game, Sean. I'm not exaggerating. At least 4 hours is on this trek to find and destroy the elephant. And the whole time I'm thinking, well, obviously, the way this story goes is they get to the elephant, because all the toys are alive in this world, and they're going to talk to the elephant, and then they're going to go, we can't do this. This was wrong, right? And then they find another way to do it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's an obviously stupid, obviously, like, we're talking from the perspective of people who, like, are watching the story, but, like, why would you... it would not make sense that, like, oh, if we make our daughter really sad, somehow that will turn us back into humans. I would imagine the thing that would do is, like, it would make you, like, even smaller toys or make the curse worse, not better.
But, like, the natural thing in a story, characters are allowed to make mistakes, but maybe the mistake is, we thought this, and then they meet the elephant and they can't go through with it. No, they torture that elephant to death. It is...
Yeah, that's one of the scenes that I saw, and I was like, what the fuck is this game?
My brother, who loves elephants and had an elephant toy as a kid that looked just like this elephant toy, physically had trouble moving the controller. He said, Jonathan, now I know what you meant about The Last of Us 2. That's the game he compared it to, because you have to... It's like a 10-minute sequence where first you, like, rip this elephant's ear off, then you rip its leg off. The whole time the elephant is this cute little girl voice, voiced by the same voice as the daughter, just to make it extra Freudian, going, please, no, I'm a good elephant, haven't I been good for you? While you're, like, ripping its limbs off. And it's never dealt with again. It's never talked about again. It's never, like, when they become humans again, they don't apologize to Rose and, like, save the elephant. These people are fucking sociopaths who shouldn't have children or be in a relationship. They should be committed. And I don't think the rest of the game ever overcomes that. And the more I talk about it here, Sean, the more I'm like, yeah, this game is brilliant in a lot of ways. I can't actually have it on the main top 10 because I hate a certain stretch of it so viscerally.
Yeah, it does seem a lot like, I didn't play the A Way Out, which is the second game that team made, but Joseph Fares, who's the director of the game, the first game he made was Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, which is still in the contest for, like, funniest dumb video game name of all time. Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. It's such a bad fucking title. And that game is, like, the same thing of where the, like, the gameplay mechanics are really interesting, and it's got this cool, like, you're controlling two characters at the same time, and it's got some very unique original puzzles. But the story is like very, like, it's not offensive in this big blatant way, but it's just like very quietly deeply sexist for the entire story, and like the way it uses female characters is like very uncomfortable. And it feels like kind of cheap and maudlin in sort of some of the directions the story goes, but in ways that the game doesn't really understand what it's doing. And yeah, like that's kind of what of like I've seen of their second game, A Way Out. Like that seems to kind of be like a lot of what these games are like. Is this like very unique, interesting ideas that are executed very well in a gameplay sense, and then all the narrative trappings around it are either like bad or very confusing.
That's pretty much it. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
All right. We've talked, preambled long enough. Do you want to dive into the main top 10, Sean?
Yeah, let's talk about our top 10 games of 2021, or 2021, as most people call it.
Sean, I will let you kick us off because I was just talking. What is your number 10 game of the year?
My number 10 game of the year, the death knell of Deathloop on my list, was Persona 5 Strikers. This is a game I have talked about a lot on the podcast recently, so I'm probably not going to go super in-depth here because I've talked about it for like several hours on the podcast already. But this became a very easy number 10 choice for me because it is a game that has like very modest ambitions. Like it's clearly not super high budget. It's not trying to tell the most groundbreaking story in a video game or like a Persona game. It's very much in this sort of like, if you're comparing the narrative style and like the narrative ambition of the game, it's a lot like a good like Naruto or One Piece movie or something like that, where it's, you know, having to work within the bounds of the original story of Persona 5 and those characters. And it can't break too far out of that, so it has to introduce two new characters, Sophia and Hasegawa Zenkichi, to sort of like hang its new story on. And that's always going to be very limiting when you have to kind of write a story that way. That's sort of like tangential to this existing franchise or this existing story. And that's where I think why it ends up kind of in this number 10 position is that its ambitions are very modest, but what it executes within those ambitions, I think, is extremely impressive, and just an absolute like joy of a game to play. And this is where people who have listened to our podcast for a while know that with these Game of the Year podcasts, I like to give special awards to different games. And one of the awards that I give to Persona 5 Strikers is the Most Original Game Award, because that's really what it felt like when I was playing this game. I was just constantly amazed at how I have never played a game quite like Persona 5 Strikers. Its fusion of like classic Persona 5 type like narrative and characters and broad game design philosophy with a lot of the specific combat design of a Dynasty Warriors style game, while not really quite being a JRPG Persona 5 and not really quite being a Dynasty Warriors, but being some like wholly unique fusion of those two franchises to create something that there's just no other game quite like it. And it has this really cool like PS2 era kind of sensibility to it, where it feels like it's figuring things out for itself and solving these really original design problems because it's kind of created its own weird hybrid genre. And that's just a thing that outside of the indie game space, and even within the indie game space, is very rare. But in like a slightly bigger budget space, it's extremely rare to find a game these days that has that kind of energy. Like it reminds me of something almost like a Gravity Rush, or in that kind of space where you're like not entirely sure how to even classify the game or talk about it in a genre style sense. And that's something that I just found incredibly invigorating throughout the entire play experience. Another award I give it is Most Relatable Character Award. Goes to Hasegawa Zenkichi for being a tired old man having to wrangle all those goddamn teenagers. Because this is one of my favorite parts of the game is Zenkichi, who's a new character played by Shinichiro Miki, who's a great voice actor I've just loved in a lot of stuff. I've loved him since in Bleach he plays a character named Urahara, who's kind of like the teacher, mentor kind of character in a shonen anime role. Also, fans of Weekly Suit Gundam will know him as Lock-on Stratos from Double O Gundam. And he just gives one of the most impressive voice performances of any game that came out this year, of this character who's a detective working for public security that's kind of like the FBI equivalent for Japan, investigating this new instance of supernatural cases similar to what happened with the Phantom Thieves. And he ends up kind of investigating the Phantom Thief group, suspecting that it's them when it's not them causing these cases, and then they end up having to kind of work together initially as this kind of uneasy alliance of the kind of, you know, the thieves who operate in the shadows outside the bounds of the law and this agent of the law. And then eventually Zenkichi sort of realizes that his role in public security prevents him from doing like what he needs to do, and that like the organization he's a part of is corrupt, and he leaves them and becomes an official Phantom Thief member. And I think my favorite stretch of the game is the middle section where all of that really kind of comes to the forefront. And you have a middle dungeon that involves Zenkichi and his daughter Akane, who's also a pretty major character in the game. That is just one of the best. It's the best sequence to me of the game, and it's one of the most compelling narrative stretches of a game I've played this year, where you really get to see such a different perspective within the bounds of a Persona game from this totally different character. Like, we just never seen this like 40-year-old man with a middle school age daughter who is kind of really down on his luck, is barely holding his life together and scraping it together. Like his relationship with the daughter has been falling apart, and him having like lost sight of a lot of the very kind of basic, simple things that like why he wanted to be like a member of public security in the first place, like what he's like wants out of his relationship with his daughter, like a lot of like basic stuff that the daily grind of this like soul crushing job he's been a part of has killed in him. And then his relationship with the Phantom Thieves kind of reminds him of all these things that he used to have and the things he wants to be in life, and like the simple goodness and the kind of purity of these teenagers in their very simple-minded way trying to make the world a better place sort of revitalizes the character. And there was like a lot of myself I kind of saw in that relationship. It's a character that was my favorite part of the game, and it's like one of the main reasons why it was very easy for me to put this game as number 10 and kick Deathloop off. The other thing about this game is that the soundtrack kicks all kinds of ass. It is such a fucking amazing soundtrack. It is, like the game, a perfect fusion from its two main sources, Persona, specifically the Persona 5 acid jazz stuff, and then the like really hardcore like metal shredding guitar kind of stylings of a Dynasty Warrior soundtrack. And you've got composers from both teams, from like the Atlas team and from the Koei Tecmo Dynasty Warrior side, working on tracks and collaborating on tracks in this game. And that all comes together in what I give to the Raddest Song Award, which is the song Counter-Strike, which is one of the late game boss songs. And it is just a complete masterpiece of a boss music. It has particularly this opening 30-second stretch that has this really, really great call and response guitar lick that I really need to like take time to sit down and listen to the track and learn, because it's just it's not a particularly complicated little piece of like guitar writing, but it is so effective and very cool. Whoever is the guitarist on that track does an incredible job. And then also Lynn's vocals on that song, which have this like, it moves like, it kind of pivots from the jazzy stuff to more kind of soul music, which is sort of, you know, in music history, there's like a lot of musical relationship there. And that kind of pivot to more like directly soul inspired music fits Lynn's vocalization style so well. And it is just a fucking absolute banger of a song. Amongst bangers, there's like 5 or 6 different original full lyrical battle themes in the game, as well as reworked versions of themes from Persona 5, including Rivers in the Desert, which is an amazing remix as well. So top to bottom, the gameplay is super original and really compelling. Story has some incredible characters with the original characters that has some great storytelling, and then just like an all-time kick-ass soundtrack, which makes for a very, very good number 10 on my games of 2020.
Well, I'm really glad to hear it's 2021, not 2020.
2021. Whatever, time is nothing. It's an empty hole that we're all falling through.
I'm actually surprised this wasn't even higher on your list, and I am very excited to play it. I have heard some of the soundtrack. I have not listened to Counter-Strike yet, because I want to hear it in the main game, but my brother has been speaking up the praises of that song endlessly to me. I asked him the other day what his favorite Persona battle song ever was, and he thought about it. He said, well, it's not one of the regular battle songs, but it might be Counter-Strike. And I went, ooh, I'm excited to hear this. But I'm in the middle of Persona 5 Royal. I'm going to jump off and do Strikers after that, and we will probably do episodes on both of those in the near future for people who have been clamoring for those. We've been clamoring for them, too.
Yes, yeah. And it is a good, like, fun, again, like side story slash sequel to Persona 5, and that's how I played it. Obviously, was playing through Royal and then moving to Persona 5 Strikers, and it's a very good time.
Awesome. All right, my number 10 game of the year is Unpacking. This is a little indie game made by a developer called Witchbeam. The developers are Ren Breyer and Tim Dawson, with music by Jeff Van Dyke. This launched on basically all platforms. It was also on Xbox Game Pass, which is where I played it. But Unpacking is one of the most unique narrative experiences I've ever seen in a game, where the entire conceit of it is 8 stages, and each stage is a different year in the life of an unseen protagonist, unseen, unnamed. You don't get any details through like cutscenes or dialogue or anything like that. All it is each stage is a room, or eventually a series of rooms, and eventually a whole house. It gets very elaborate, and it presents you with a bunch of boxes, and you unpack the boxes, and you have to arrange all the stuff in the boxes in the room, with the implication every time being you are moving into this new space. And you start as it's even like, and everything in the game is, all the story is conveyed through what you take out of those boxes and the rooms you put them into. So like in that first level or two is when you piece together just very basic things like that you're a kid at the beginning, and then you're a girl, which you learn over the course of the game, because you realize you kind of, there are all the signifiers of like, oh, what would tell me that this person is a man or a woman moving into a house. On to things like, okay, how are they doing in college? What is their sexuality? How awful a boyfriend do they have at this phase in their life? Oh, now they are in a queer relationship. Now they are in a happy queer relationship. Now they have a kid. All of this kind of stuff is all through what you unpack out of those boxes. And I think it is a really brilliant narrative conceit that is done in a really touching way, because again, it is a story entirely without words or without direct signifiers, but you feel like you really come to know this person and their life by unpacking their stuff, down to like what their taste in movies and games is. And it's all this like really beautiful high-res pixel art. And I love they do stuff like, there's a version of the GameCube, there's the version of the PS2, there's a version of the Wii, and then all of the boxes for those. Eventually, they have a stack of Blu-rays. Sean, you would like this game because one of the Blu-rays prominently is very clearly Shin Godzilla.
Awesome.
In a pixel art style. You can't see the title, there's no copyright infringement, but it is the red cover with the black Godzilla. It's very clearly Shin Godzilla. There's other movies and games you will recognize in there. The spaces are just so imaginative, and the way it traces basically like probably 20 years of this person's life, from when they're a little kid, maybe more than 20 years, to when they are like out of college, an adult, have a career, and have a spouse, and have a child of their own. And it does it through all of these moves you do. And I think it's a very relatable experience, because unpacking is not a fun thing in the real world, but it's something we all do at somewhat regular intervals.
Yep,
and
I'm well aware of this fact.
Yes, you are well aware of it this year, Sean. I've been well aware of it in recent years. And it is often tied to like big life movements, right? So like you do I think in our memories, we do mark things by where we were moving and what we were doing and what we unpacked, right? And what we took with us. And I think it's really smart on that level. It's a really lovely little story it tells. It's a very lovely love story without ever seeing either of the two people in that love together. You know, I think one of the levels that got a lot of attention is the level where she moves in with her like college boyfriend, and you learn that he is an absolute piece of shit, because when you go to move your stuff in, he hasn't made space for any of your stuff. So it's like the hardest level, because you have to find places for like socks, and like in the bathroom, like your tampons and other things like women have in a bathroom that this douchebag dude has not made any room for. And so that's sort of how you learn, oh, this isn't gonna go well, and then the next stage after that is moving back in with your parents. But then I also think the flip side of that is when she moves in with her girlfriend later on, it's really beautiful to see the compatibility between these two people through the stuff that is in their shared space. And I think all of that is really beautiful and fun. It is also just a super fun puzzle game, because the basic game mechanic is taking all of this stuff out of boxes and figuring out where it goes. Some of that is just a little intellectual, like, okay, this thing is in this room, but it's clearly for the bathroom, so put it there. This thing is for the kitchen, put it there. But then there's only so much space, and so it becomes kind of like a real-world Tetris sort of thing to get everything to fit in the space, while there's also a lot of, like, personal expression you can give to things, because you can put them in your own design and have the room kind of look the way you want it to look. It's a short game. It's only a couple hours long. It's a perfect kind of Game Pass game, because it's the kind of thing I don't know if I would have like spent the $20 to try, but because it was on Game Pass, I tried it, and I'm so glad I did. I loved it. This is a game with much more modest ambitions narratively and in terms of game design than a lot of what's on my list, or than like It Takes Two, which fell off the list for me. But I love everything about this game. I think it's like a perfect little game, and I will take that over, I think, It Takes Two very clearly for me. The music is lovely. I love those visuals. I love little motifs like your sort of stuffed pig doll that carries with you throughout your life and then eventually winds up in your like child's room at the end. There's just a lot of really beautiful stuff like that in the game. It's very cool, and if you want just like a kind of cream of the crop, neat indie experience, this is one that I would 100% recommend, and I'm really glad I made this last minute choice to put it on my top 10.
Awesome. Yeah, like I feel like I've heard the name Unpacking a lot this year, but I've never actually heard anybody describe what the game was. That sounds really cool.
It's awesome. Yeah. I mean, you have a Series S now. I would try it.
Yeah. Because I think in my head, I think I got it mixed up with there's like a co-op game that is like you moving stuff.
Yes.
Like yeah, I think I got those two games like kind of jumbled in my head.
I love that one. That might have been on my top 10 last year. I forget, but that one was last year, and it's also phenomenal. I love that one. It's Moving Out is what that's called.
Yes.
That game is incredibly goofy and silly. Unpacking is not goofy or silly, but they are both great games about moving things, just very different games about moving things.
Very cool. It's its own whole new genre, is games about moving shit and moving house.
Maybe we've just run out of topics for video games.
Or maybe, like the world is falling apart and everyone's having to like move into different places because you can't manage to live in the same place for too long, which is actually might be exactly what it is.
Well, thanks for bringing the mood down, Sean.
Yep.
What is your number 9 game of the year?
My number 9 game of the year, in the first of this is technically a game that was released in 2020, but its PS5 version came out in February 2021. This is Nioh 2, the sequel to Nioh. This was one of the first games I played after the move to Texas, talking about moving. And that's like very much like this year is like, when I look at my list of 10 games, it is very much like split on, here are the games that I played in Texas, here are the games I played in Colorado, and then there is one game that I'll get to that is like the one game I played not only when I was in Colorado, but also when I didn't know that I would eventually not have a job and be moving to Texas. But so in my head, I kind of like fit those games in those categories. And Nioh 2 as being this like big meaty game to play after moving here and kind of getting settled in, and it being a very iterative sequel of Nioh 1. I think that's probably the reason why I justified myself to put it at the lower end of the list. Again, like I said at the top of this podcast, it would be very easy for me to reorder this list such that this game would be number 4, and it would not feel weird to me in the slightest, because my number like 9, 2, 4, or 3 are very similar in quality in my head. But this is, the core foundation of Nioh 2 is very much Nioh 1. It is, your Souls-like kind of action game, but with a much more expanded combat element, with really elaborate skill trees across a wide selection of different kinds of melee weapons, with elaborate different kinds of parries and counter systems that you can engage with that are unique based on the weapon you're using. 3 different stances per weapon, with light and medium or light and heavy attacks on all the stances that can then be chained into the different stances and stuff. Like a very technically complicated combat system in a Souls-ish exploration format, but with a big hub world and like bite-sized levels you can engage with. And it's, as was true with Nioh 1 and is even more so with Nioh 2, which is just a smart evolution of the design of the first game, it is the most interesting, I think, take on a Souls-like game I've seen out of anyone that's not From Software, of very clearly having a lot of those core inspired elements that they're just like, let's just take the the flask concept from Dark Souls 1 and just steal it. Like, let's just take and steal a lot of the level design philosophy and the shortcuts that loop back on themselves and stuff like that. And it's very shameless in the way they just sort of take those elements and don't give a shit, because there's so much else the game does that it so fully and readily distinguishes itself from the rest of that genre to make itself its own unique thing. one of the awards I give to Neo 2 is an award I gave to Neo 1, and then I gave it to Ghost of Tsushima last year, and that was coming back home to the Neo franchise, and that is Akira Kurosawa Presents Best Action Award. This award originally came about because the long storied history of Neo, the original Neo game, goes back to an abandoned Akira Kurosawa movie project that never actually got off the ground, but there was a script that existed that Kurosawa was involved with, and that is the origin of this project in its very weird, convoluted development history. If you want to hear more about that, listen to our Game of the Year 2017 podcast where I talk about that. When I first gave this award to the original Neo 1, but Neo 2, it's like a very easy title to give. Like, if you are into technically complicated action systems in mechanics and games, there's really nothing better for that on the market than Neo or Neo 2. Neo 2, like, expanding on the skill trees in the skills for the existing weapons and then adding multiple new weapons into the mix as well as a lot of new enemies, which is probably the biggest improvement in the game. Is there's a tremendously expanded enemy variety that makes the action even more fun. But there's nothing more engaging than a game than that feeling of like slow mastery over these mechanics in Neo 2. And it's a long game. I think I probably put about 100 to 120 hours across the entire game, plus the 3 DLC packs that they released. And I basically only used 2 different weapon types for that entire time. The dual katanas and the odachi, which is like a giant fuck-off, super giant, like Final Fantasy style big sword. And I still feel like I was discovering more optimized ways to use both of those weapons when I was getting into the DLC, and the game pushed me even harder and harder and harder. And that is a sign of like just utterly masterful action design, where you can see the legacy of the development team at Team Ninja going back to the original Xbox Ninja Gaiden, the remake of the Ninja Gaiden franchise on the original Xbox. And that legacy lives so strong in Neo and Neo 2, and it's just like kind of incomparable with anything else. Nothing else can even really come close to what these games do. Another award that I'm happy that Neo 2 gets to take, that was an award I originally created for Neo 1, and then also was taken by Ghost of Tsushima last year, and now has come back home to Neo 2, is the Coolest Shit Award, which goes to wiping blood off your sword and sheathing animation, because it's always cool. It was super cool in movies when they did it. It was super cool in Neo when they did it. It was super cool in Ghost of Tsushima when they did it. And now it's super cool in Neo 2 when they do it. And now you can do it with like 5 more weapons that you're able to do it in Neo 1. Because it's not just a sword. It's like everything has its own unique, after you've killed an enemy with it and you sheathe your weapon animations. And so there's like probably like a dozen plus of those in this game. And they're all fucking super cool. And is the best feeling in the world. Just going to town and fucking up some dudes or some demons and getting covered in blood, and then just flicking the blood off the sword, and then slowly sheathing it in your sheath. It is always the coolest fucking thing you can do in anything. And it was the most important thing of Neo that they kept for Neo 2 and expanded on, is this animation.
I mean, that's awesome. Yeah. Sean, I have to ask you, is there a way, is there like a lore accurate way they can do that in like Jedi Fallen Order 2 with a lightsaber? What would the lightsaber equivalent of like wiping the blood off be?
I mean, the problem with lightsabers is that they just cauterize the wound and dissolve all the blood as soon as they cut, right? So it's like, unfortunately, you just can't. Maybe you just have a very stylish way of turning your lightsaber off.
Yeah.
Or what you do is, instead of stabbing a guy with the lightsaber, you just beat them to death with the blunt end of the handle. And then it just gets covered in like blood and brains and shit, and then you just gotta like wipe it off on your like Jedi cloak. Make sure you wash that later, because it's going to get real nasty and stink real bad. But that's probably like the best you could do.
Well, I hope that's an option in Jedi Fallen Order 2. I hope you're listening over there, guys.
Yeah, Respawn makes Jedi Fallen Order 2 very, very dark. You know, I was very surprised when they said their main inspiration was The Last of Us Part 2, but that's where they really went for.
Oh, God.
His lightsaber actually just doesn't even work. It's just basically a hammer. Like, he lost the fucking crystal. Anyways, enough about that. There's one thing I want to end with Neo 2, which is actually, it is a small thing in this game, but it is probably, like, for me, the most delightful thing. It gets my Character of the Year award, which goes to me, my kick-ass samurai demon lady, because this game has the best implementation of a character creator I have ever seen in a game. Particularly if you're someone like me who likes to roleplay with that kind of stuff. If you're someone like when you played Red Dead Redemption 2, if you were like very particular about the like outfits your character wore and like at what point in the story they change like to be more rustic or more sort of like luxurious or extravagant with their clothing, that kind of thing, which I really like, sort of expressing my vision of the character through those kinds of choices. What Neo 2 does is it, one, has a story that takes place over the course of about 60 years through the actual like history of Japan, from like the like young adulthood of Hideyoshi Toyotomi, a historical figure in Japanese history, to like past the death of that actual guy. So it's like the whole lifetime of a character that you kind of spend playing as your character, with big time jumps obviously between the different chapters in the game. And so it has that, and it's got a very detailed character creator that you can access and completely change the way your character looks at any point in the game. It's not a you just make your character at the beginning and you're stuck with it. And there are so many different hairstyles and fun little things you can do with your character. And so what I did while playing the game is I sort of created a vision of what my character was, and then had her age up over the course of the story, and like put more wrinkles on her and more scars, and change her hair color. And one thing I really liked being able to do was express sort of like this very shonen anime kind of thing with the character, where your main character is half demon, half human. That's sort of like one of the main twists for Neo 2 that leads to a lot of gameplay stuff. But it also means you can turn into this like big demon form. And so one thing I did with my characters, once I saw that, I added some character elements to her design that expressed that. So I gave her a big scar across her left eye and the eye patch, which is your kind of classic character design thing. But really what I did with that is I changed her pupil color in her left eye to be this like really bright glowing blue, which is the color in the cutscenes. When you start activating your like demon powers in the cutscene, your eyes turn that color. So like in my head it was, oh, she can't fully control it, and that's actually why she has the eye patch on, is to cover up the fact that that eye is still blue. And then also when you turn demon, your hair turns bright white, and so you can add little streaks of like secondary colors to your hairstyle in the game. So I slowly over the course of the game added more and more streaks of white to her black hair as she was like becoming more demonified or whatever. And then when I got to the DLC, and at that point the character's like, you know, in world, I think she's like a 70-year-old woman at that point, like officially, like, you know, she's half demons. Who knows how that affects your like body? And so with the DLC, in this kind of post, you have dealt with all of your issues, you've resolved yourself kind of thing. I took the eye patch off, I made both of her eyes bright blue, and gave her completely white hair. And it felt like this way to express like this character has come at peace with the two halves of herself, the demon half that she couldn't quite control for most of her life, and this human half that she wanted but isn't really who she is. And then like she's happy being this sort of halfling thing in between, and that's like okay. And none of that is a thing that like is particularly expressed in the story. There are little tiny hints of it that I kind of picked up on to get that idea for the character. But the ability for me to be able to express so fully this idea of the character I was playing through little things like that, I've never seen a game give me the kind of space to very easily do that before, and particularly something that's like a big, crazy action game like this. And that is a very small thing that I imagine a lot of people playing this game probably wouldn't really even think about or engage with. But for me, it made me very happy, and I thought it was like such a smart, cool little thing to allow players to do, and to tell this story that allows you to like age your character up and change them and evolve them over the course of the story the way that you want to. And that's the kind of thing that a video game can do that, you know, you can't do in any other medium. And so that is one of the things about Neo 2 I most fully appreciated from this year.
Sean, that's awesome. I really would love to play those games at some point. Sadly, I have a bunch of like FromSoft, like real FromSoft games I need to get to. I also want to play Neo. That one's going to be in my backlog for a while, although knowing that there is the like good PlayStation 5 version now definitely makes it something that I might go to at some point. Those seem like awesome games.
Yeah, and you don't have to play Neo 1. You can just jump straight to Neo 2, which is better, and there's like it is technically a prequel, so that you don't really need to know anything from the first game, and the main plot stuff is like very light, so it doesn't,
right,
even if you needed to know something, it wouldn't factor in that much.
Well, and honestly, the character creator is something you hadn't talked about before, and that was really cool to hear about, because everyone likes them a good character creator. So yes, there you go. And this
is like straight up one of the best I've seen, outside of something that's like a Sims or something that is designed, or like half the game is you just making characters. Yeah, right. It's fucking awesome.
All right. My number 9 game of the year is Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, developed by Eidos Montreal. This one was on everything. I played it on PS5. This is an interesting case where, and I've talked about this game fairly extensively on the podcast before, but to summarize, kind of in relation to another thing that actually fell off my list, which was It Takes Two, it's kind of interesting because I think Guardians has this one central weakness, which is that its central combat is not very good. It's like fine in short bursts, but the game has a level design problem specifically near the end where it funnels you into an awful lot of combat for a very long period of time, and you realize that it's not the kind of combat that can really stand up to a lot of scrutiny. And so, It Takes Two is a game that fell off my list and I think has objectively better gameplay than Guardians of the Galaxy. And I'm not always the kind of person who says, like, story is everything. I care about the story in the game more than anything else, right? But I do think the central strength of Guardians is its writing, its presentation, and its command of tone. And that is something that really elevates this game, where even if I am not having all that much fun with the combat in the second half of the game, it's really easy to forgive that kind of flaw when the overall package feels so smart and soulful and dedicated to give you this really great narrative experience wrapped up in a big gameplay package. And I think it's a really special example of what games can do as a storytelling medium that movies can't. And we've talked about this before, that we love certain live-action superhero movies, but that's a weird medium to adopt comic books into, Animation is better, and video games are increasingly proving to be a great way to do comic book stories because they are like serial and long form in their nature, in addition to being animated and more plastic and rubbery in the way a comic book can be. And I think Eidos Montreal pulls off something pretty similar to what Insomniac did with Spidey here. It's not as good as the Insomniac Spider-Man games. I also think Eidos Montreal probably had a harder burden put on them here, in part because they haven't made a game like this before. Insomniac, when you play a Ratchet and Clank game and then you play Spider-Man, you're like, oh, they knew exactly what to do with this, right? But the other big challenge here is that Spider-Man has a million different versions, and Insomniac, I don't think it's very hard for them to carve out their own Spider-Man space. I'm sure it takes a lot of artistic effort, but it's not like you're going to run into a bunch of roadblocks, right? Whereas with Guardians of the Galaxy, they are pretty much only known in the public conscious in the James Gunn movie versions, and that is the exact team they were probably directed by Disney to use here. And so the biggest magic trick I think this entire game conjures is making these characters feel like they are their own versions. You really quickly stop comparing them to the James Gunn incarnations, despite there being obvious surface similarities. And I think the one they do this most impressively with is Peter Quill, the main character, who they do such a different version than the Chris Pratt, like, man-child 80s nostalgia boy. They really do a very different version of someone who is in over his head, is not the smartest or the strongest person on the team or in any given room, but he is the pluckiest, and he is the most hopeful, and he is the one who I think has the most empathy and ability to see good in others, and that is the thing that makes him and makes Star-Lord special, and that is what this entire game is built around. And I think even if the combat isn't perfect, the central choice this game makes of you are Star-Lord 100% of the time, you are never controlling or playing as the other Guardians, you are using them in combat, but you are more giving them directions, which sometimes they don't even take. It really makes you feel like it is a role-playing experience for Star-Lord and a really deep understanding of that character, and because of that, the game has a really immense and, I think, inspired sense of perspective, which makes the other four Guardians even more interesting because it's so clear what vantage point you are looking at them from. And I think that is one of the things this game does that I think a lot of other games could learn from, is it intentionally limits itself in what it's going to show you. And in doing that, I think it shows you a more full, interesting version of this world and these characters than it may have otherwise been able to do. And the writing is just so good. It's as well written a AAA Western game as I've seen in years, particularly in how it nails character voice. I think there's really an almost Naughty Dog sensibility to how good and how much of writing there is and how good the performances are in executing those voices. The art direction and graphics are just off the charts, like, to a degree that I think anyone who's played this game has praised this, but it almost deserves even more praise. This is one of the most graphically impressive games of the new generation. It's got such phenomenal art direction. I love the way it employs sort of the James Gunn style soundtrack, and overall it's just overflowing with heart. You know, I can forgive some monotonous combat. I have played plenty of games with mechanics that are in the game, but I have played very few games that made me laugh this hard, that built a world this cool, that made me love the central characters, and a lot of the extended supporting cast, because there's a lot of, when you get out of the main five, they're able to add a lot of cool, kind of unexpected characters into the mix. And I have no idea how well this game has sold. It definitely went on sale very fast, but it came out pretty near Black Friday, so I don't know if that's an indication of sales. But I hope Eidos Montreal gets to do a sequel, because I think if they were able to refine some of the gameplay and really nail that side of the equation, they could make a superhero game for the ages. And they're clearly a really cool team over there, and I would love to see them get to do this again, and maybe at an even higher level of execution. But overall, plenty for my number 9, a game I really, really highly recommend. Just, you know, it's still not that often we just get a solid, it's a $60 single-player experience, 15 to 20 hours. That's all it is. Yes, pump that shit into my veins. I love it.
Yeah, this is definitely a game that's like on my backlog, because I remember you asking me on the podcast, like, well, you think you'll be able to play it for the end of the year? I'm like, fucking, I looked at Tales of Rise, I'm like, no. It's like, no, I'm not. Just not enough time. But yeah, this is a game that very quickly got put onto my backlog that I want to find some time, some space to make time for, because it sounds awesome and right up my alley.
It's great. So that's my number 9.
Awesome. My number 8 is Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. This is a game, I don't even know how much to talk about this, because we did a whole podcast. This is a rare instance where we did a whole podcast, and I'm guessing this is probably on your list somewhere, Jonathan.
It is. It's a little bit higher.
Okay, so and again, this was... I'm going to reiterate this for every single one, just because I feel like I need to. It's like, again, this is this could have been anywhere. This could have easily also been a number 4, because this game is fucking awesome. Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is, I think, just to sum it up, it is just like purely a joyful game. It is a complete joy to play. It is a complete joy to experience the characters, the story, the music, the world. There's no point in the game that is not just like fun and happy and engaging and joyful. And that is definitely something in, the year of our Lord 2021, and I suspect will be true of 2022 as well. With it, you desperately need, and is in like unfortunately short supply, is just something that makes you feel good. And Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart does that with absolute fucking aplomb.
Sean, I really think we need to petition Joe Biden to institute the Defense Production Act to make more Ratchet and Clank games. Or at least, at the very least, Defense Production Act to have someone remaster the old Ratchet and Clanks for PS5 so we have a steady stream of Ratchet and Clank, because it always makes you feel good. I agree with you on that. I think that would be good for the health of the nation. Let's do that.
It's like, honestly, if you go to a therapist, they should just sit you down and have you play Ratchet and Clank while they chat with you. Like, that would be like the thing that would be most good for most people's mental health, I think. Just let me play as this cute little Lombax dude and jump around and shoot funny robots and just have a good time. But one of the things with Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart in particular, that sets it apart from other games this year and from previous entries, is that this is obviously a big PS5 exclusive, like one of the first big PS5 exclusives of this year. That's where it gets my gosh, that sure is Purdy award for best graphics, because holy fucking shit. And I can say that because I live in Texas now. It's not Texas racist or whatever, because I live here now. But this game, so as I often do when we do Game of the Year stuff, is I spend like the week or so before we record the podcast just sort of messing around with some of the games, just to sort of make sure for a game like this that came out in the first half of the year, I'm kind of touching it again and kind of re-getting into the vibe and reminding myself, so I feel like it's easier for me to place it. And as soon as I looked at the game, my mind was still completely blown. Like, I think this game just looks fucking believable. Like, Digital Foundry also did a year-end wrap-up where they went over, like, ranked sort of like some of what they thought were the best looking games of the year. They also said that Ratchet & Clank was the best, because it is a perfect combination of this like next level of sort of like technical sort of headroom for them to be able to do things that they would not have been able to do, both in like very technical senses with the portals and all that, which is amazing, but also in the more traditional sense of it being able to be high resolution, the fucking miracle of it having ray tracing and a smooth 60 frames per second mode, which is unfucking believable. It's completely incredible. The super high density, really highly detailed character models, the fur shaders, which are best in class. It is the best like hair has ever looked in any video game, and it's completely amazing. Like all of that stuff just makes this fully complete package that is this real like you are playing an animated movie thing, which is a kind of a cliche in the history of video games. I feel like people have always said that at generational jumps, but this is the one that most is like you literally can put it next to not even just like the Ratchet and Clank animated movie, which is an easy comparison, but other like 3D pre-rendered animated films. And, most of them will be better than Ratchet and Clank in very specific ways because they're pre-rendered and the things they can do. But the overall effect is not that different. And Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart has to render all that stuff in real time at 60 frames per second. And the fact that like artistic gap is, and that technical gap has shortened so much so quickly that this is not a 2028 game or something like right on the eve of the PS6 coming out. This is like within the first full year of the PS5's life, we get Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, and it just feels like a miracle of the way this game looks, and it makes me so excited to see what Insomniac will do in the future. But obviously looking really good is only one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is how it plays and how it feels to play. And the game is also just a complete joy to control. One of the awards I give it is I Could Do This Forever award for revving up the rocket boots, because revving up the rocket boots in Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is one of those perfect video game mechanics that, particularly with the DualSense controller and the feedback you get, as well as just like the sound design, the graphics, everything they put into it, it just purely feels fucking good. Like you can be doing nothing else in the game, and as long as you're like revving up those rocket boots and zooming around and doing jumps, there's no challenge, you're not fighting enemies, you're not even completing a level, you're just doing that. That's just fun. Like that's just a good fucking time. And it's a sign of like true like mastery of video game design and of talent to be able to do that, to make a thing that like regardless of the context you're using it in a level, it's just fun to do. And that, I think the rocket boots are for me like the most clear illustration of that, but it's really true of basically everything you do in the game. Like whether or not you're even shooting the robots, just shooting the guns is fun and engaging because it tactilely feels good with the controller. It like the graphics and the effects and the sound effects and all that come together to make like just this really purely satisfying video game to play. And then on top of that, the characters are funny, very heartwarming. It's a just great little story. The new characters in particular, like Rivet, are just a complete joy. And this is one of two games this year that I also give one of my favorite awards to give, which is the Game's So Nice, I Played It Twice award, because this is one of those games that I beat it and then I immediately turned around New Game Plus and just played it all the way through again, because that's just how goddamn fun it is.
I think you are 100% right, and I would honestly, Sean, this game looks better than most animated movies from America, at least. Honestly, like I saw the trailer for the new Pixar movie that's now being just sent to Disney Plus the other day when I went to a movie, and it looked like garbage. Not necessarily the movie itself, I don't know enough about it, but like the visuals of it. Just American CGI movies are so kind of like flat and plasticky and ugly, and they're never about fun animals anymore. I miss the days when animated movies were about fun animals. They always have to be about people who look really weird in 3D CGI. And Ratchet and Clank, I would rather look at that all fucking day, baby. It is a beautiful, smooth, buttery game.
Yeah, because it's not just the technical stuff. It's also like their art design is like world class, right?
Yes,
so any places where like technically they wouldn't, like this element of rendering or this piece of lighting or whatever is not as good as it could be if it's pre-rendered, is made up for by the fact that like their art design is just like it is best in class. Like it is at that top level. That regardless of what medium you're in, if you're making a movie or you're making a game, if you don't have the art design, like the technical qualifications don't matter.
Yeah. Well, going from a game that is one of the most beautiful ever made to a game that is still to me surprisingly ugly, and I don't quite know what happened on that level, but I like it in other ways. My number 8 is Halo Infinite. developed by 343 Industries for the Xbox and PC. Halo Infinite is a wildly imperfect game in a whole lot of ways. The multiplayer I've come to enjoy quite a bit, and I do play a little bit of it every day. I actually did, as an experiment, because I had $8 extra. I did buy the Battle Pass for Season 1 just to... it's the kind of thing I probably wouldn't do if I didn't have a podcast to talk about it on, but I was kind of curious how it feels. And I think the Battle Pass is stingy and shitty in a whole lot of ways. I do think the challenges have gotten better, and I do think they're generally good at doing the thing challenges like that should do, which is directing you to different parts of the game so you have some variety while you play and are pushed in different directions. But overall, I've come to enjoy at least the main 4-on-4 arena multiplayer. The big team battle is still utterly fucking broken, and I am very confused why 343 is still issuing challenges for big team battle when it is broken, and they've acknowledged it's broken, and it almost feels like a scheme to sell challenge swaps. I don't think they're that cynical, but, a good way to avoid that implication would be to just stop putting big team battle challenges until you fix big team battle. Anyway, I'm saying a lot of negative things. Sean, you said something when we talked about Halo Infinite a couple weeks ago that, one of the things you and I agreed on is that this game gets the 30 seconds of fun idea very, very well. And that is the thing. That is the primary thing for me with Halo Infinite, is it is one of the most, expertly playable games I've played in a long time. It feels so good in the hand. I think the guns feel great to shoot with. I don't love the entire, gun class they've come up with for this game, but I think overall it's a good group. I think the choice to, really pare down from the guns in, Halo 4 and 5 was obviously a very good choice, and some of the guns that I initially didn't understand I've come to like quite a bit. But overall, the movement and the shooting and all of that feels so good. The primary reason it is on this list is for the campaign, which is it's the best Halo campaign since Halo Reach, which isn't saying a whole lot because there's only been 2 since then, and that's 4 and 5, and they're not very good. But it is a game that I think understands the core of what makes Halo appealing, and I think the move from the linear levels to this open world for at least that big middle stretch of the game is an inspired thing. There are things that could be improved about the open world, but I just had a whole bundle of fun with that before it puts you back on the corridor rails for the final, 3 hours of the game, and that's not very good. But the open world stretch I really enjoyed, and I would like more of that. It's the kind of game where I am actively excited for any kind of campaign DLC, because I think there's a lot of cool stuff they could do there. I think the entire system of going out and getting these forward operating bases and the kind of little pieces of sandbox magic that can happen from starting at a forward operating base, getting whatever vehicle and gun you want, and then going out and weird things will happen along the way. Maybe you rescue some Marines and you put them in the back of your Warthog, and then you go off to do a mission together. Maybe you find one of those weird grunt propaganda towers that are kind of inexplicable, but I'm glad they're in the game because they're fucking weird and I like it. There's so many crazy things that can happen, down to deciding what, this base is over here, I'm gonna get in a fucking Scorpion and just assault this base with a Scorpion. That kind of thing can be very fun in this game. So the open world part of it I liked an awful lot. I think the story, I've said this before and this is still my feeling on it, I think at a macro level it is gobbledygook gibberish. At a micro level it is often very good because I think the 3 main characters for this, the pilot, the weapon, and the Master Chief, have a very good sort of core chemistry, and I think Jen Taylor does some of the year's best acting in that role as the weapon. And on the macro level, at a very fucking least, they closed the book on their weird Cortana cul-de-sac that 343 has decided they have been on for 10 years now. And that's a weird thing they chose to do. I'm not sure why they decided for 3 games in a row to just repeat the beats from Halo 3. They did do that. At least she's dead now. So there's that. But overall, I just, that, and then I do think the multiplayer is imperfect in a lot of ways, but is by far the most I've enjoyed Halo multiplayer since I was in college. Halo, I agree with you, Sean, when you talked about the Master Chief Collection and all the wonderful things about it. But there is sort of a difference between having something that is like a relic, not a relic, but a preserved piece of the past, but it feels like it's from the past, and having something that feels alive and new again. And I think at its best, Halo Infinite, what it does for Halo is it makes it feel like this franchise has some kind of future again, and it hasn't felt like that in a very, very long time, and I do look forward to see where it goes from here. I think 8 is probably the right place to put it for me, because I do think as a game to play, it is a lot more compelling and interesting than like a Guardians of the Galaxy. As an overall package, it is much, much more imperfect than anything in my top 7, which are all really, really rock-solid video games. But, I was just playing Halo Infinite this morning. It's a fun kind of game. I kick back and relax and listen to podcasts while playing or something. And, I like it. This is probably the most like mixed I've ever been on a game in my top 10 in terms of giving you all the points. But the things I like about Halo Infinite, I like an awful fucking lot.
Yeah, it's not on my list, but yeah, like I think I very much agree with you that the thing that it does, the thing I'm excited for, is that it feels like it has cleared the deck, right? And it's like a good foundation for 343 to build from in the future, which is, I think that, like you said, it is like Halo has been a franchise for a long time that I felt like, and kind of has just been basically dead, because it was like 6 years between Halo 5 and Halo Infinite. And there was a lot of me that felt like, well, maybe it should just stay that way. And I'm not sure I fully don't think that it should just stay that way, because there's a little bit of like, it's okay for things to end and to move on. But this is like, but if this is where they are, this is a way better place than they have been, you know, since they took over the franchise, basically.
Absolutely true. All right, that's my number 8. What's your number 7?
My number 7, a game that was incredibly hard for me to figure out where to put it on this list, was Hitman 3. I don't know how to rank these games. It's, you know, Hitman 3 is 3. It's Hitman 1 and Hitman 2 on PS5 also, with all that stuff in it, and it's all a brand new Hitman game, so I don't know how to rank this game.
Sean, I just want to tell you right now, my number 7 is also Hitman 3.
Well, great. This is one of those just like confluence moments that we always get at least one or two of on a list. So we could just talk about Hitman 3 together, because I do. Were you with me, Jonathan, that this was just when you're like, I don't know where to fucking put this. Like, I don't know how to think about this game relative to other video games, because I've been playing the Hitman to death since 2016. Like, what do I even do?
Not quite for me, actually, because Sean, you might notice this is actually the first time a Hitman has been on my top 10.
All right, I forgot you have bad top 10 lists.
Oh, thanks, Sean. Fuck you.
You're welcome.
No, Hitman 1, I didn't play in time, so that's why it missed my top 10 that year. Hitman 2, that was a crazy year. Hitman 2 came out, and there was a lot, and it just kind of missed outside, because I've never been quite as in love with these games as you have been, Sean. But Hitman 3 was a lock from the moment it came out, and the hard thing for me, Sean, was every time I would look at my list of games I played this year, going, that didn't come out this year, and then having to check, and I'm like, no, it was the first game that came out this year.
Yes.
And I played it forever ago, but when it came out, I played the shit out of it. And I think, you know, the reason this one just felt like a lock for me, and I knew I was going to make room for it on my top 10, even though, and I think you're going to say this, it is weaker in some ways than the first two Hitman games, primarily in the number of stages and I think the variety of activities. But for me, I think it gained something that drew me in personally that the first two didn't have, which was that just extra oomph of really good storytelling that kind of tied all these levels together and gave the overall experience a sort of propulsiveness and sense of overall continuity, one level leading into another with a real sense of sort of the stakes raising along the way. And it just drew me in that much more. You know, the modern Hitman design is undeniably brilliant. It is enduringly brilliant. That's why it has been a staple of this podcast for years. But it's also so open-ended that I think it can sometimes lose me personally, and I just didn't have that problem with Hitman 3. I really loved these levels. I loved the different gimmicks. The Sherlock Holmes one, the fucking, the one in the wine, the vineyard that I just did a mission in the other day, and I realized how you can lock the people in the fucking freezer in the vineyard one, and I laughed for like 10 minutes. That one reminds me of like the throwing the heart away in Hitman 1. Just a great little moment. But, you know, I really loved these. I really got into the groove of exploring every nook and cranny and having fun with the clockwork intricacy of these murder fun houses. I thought there's fewer levels here, but to me they were all bangers. Berlin is the best. Berlin is my favorite in the three games. I think it's phenomenal. But beyond that, man, I just the other one I didn't mention yet is the China map, which just has this incredible scale to it. This one, for whatever reason, really captured my imagination, and it is my favorite of the three Hitmans, even though I think it's weird to talk about them separately, because now that we have them all, to me it's just Hitman. There's the Hitman launcher on my PS5, and there are 20 levels or so, maybe a few more, in that package, and I can go in and play whatever I want, and Hitman 3 is the last 5 or 6 of those. But man, I fucking loved this game, and it was a little hard to rank more for like when it came out than anything, but I'm really glad I put it on my top 10 this year.
Yeah, because for me, and this is because we had this conversation a year ago when this game came out, basically, because the game is almost exactly 1 year old from us recording this podcast. Like, it came out like in January of 2021. For me personally, I think this is the weakest of the three. If you're like just cutting out the individual sections that are new, I would say that this is the weakest of the three Hitman games. But it's one that has, I think, it's got like some of the weakest maps, and it's got some of the best maps, and it's got like some of like the most like incredible like assassinations and stuff. It's got a slightly different kind of philosophy to how it approaches that stuff, and there's more big, crazy, very elaborate sequences that you can kind of trigger and engage with in this game, and that stuff is really fun. But also, almost as a consequence of that, there is inherently less variety to most of the maps, because they are designed around like more of a handful of set piece moments, rather than like the Hitman 2 map design, which probably, I would say, like Hitman 1 was the most fun I had playing while they were coming out. The Hitman 2 maps are, I would say, the best maps. If you're like really into these games, they are the most complex. They've got the most moving pieces. They're like the ones that are most difficult but most satisfying for me to master. So it's like the Hitman 2 maps are like big and just have so much going on, that they're so much fun and you can just, I feel like, play them endlessly. Whereas I think the Hitman 3 maps, some of them don't have as much life, but the maps that are really good and the stuff in the game that's really good is it's still fucking Hitman, right? So it's still head and shoulders above almost any other game. Like, it still gives you this level of like freedom and expressiveness in gameplay and game design that no other video games even really get particularly close to. This is the kind of thing that, you know, Hitman 3 and Deathloop coming out in the same year is like, Deathloop just is put completely and utterly to shame by the game design of Hitman 3. Like, it's not even fucking close. And they are both trying to express and get at very similar game design ideas, and Deathloop is just completely lost in the fucking woods trying to figure out how to express its game ideas. And Hitman 3 is like standing on top of this incredible mountain with two other games that now are like 60 frames per second with like 4K resolution and all that shit. Because, you know, I probably almost spent more time replaying Hitman 1 and Hitman 2 stuff this year than just Hitman 3 stuff, just because there's way more Hitman 1 and Hitman 2. And I replayed sections of like all of those old maps and stuff just to like replay them again in the remastered kind of PS5 versions. Which is one of the reasons why it's hard to rank this game, is because it's like, as you say, it's not really just Hitman 3. It is Hitman PS5 that has all the Hitman 3 like new maps in there also. And so that's the stuff that makes it hard to rank in and of itself. But some of the Hitman 3 stuff, here's some of the awards I gave it, because I'll agree with you, Jonathan. Its best level award goes to Berlin. I think that is easily the best level in Hitman 3 that most fully expresses the unique ideas of Hitman 3 and like the different approach that IO went with some of the map design. And Berlin is like the most successful and most invigorating, and it's so much fun to play on your first playthrough of Berlin. Is one of the most fun things to do in any of these games, is that first playthrough. And then the way that map really unfolds and evolves through multiple playthroughs as you master it. It is much smaller than Hitman 2 maps, but the multitude of targets means it has a similar level of like experimentation. And it's something that I feel like the other maps in the game, just like, I wish they kind of could live up to what Berlin is doing, because Berlin does it so well. And then the best assassination award goes to, in Berlin, shooting your way out of the basement is like one of the fucking coolest moments of any game this year. Like, that whole opportunity or whatever is just, as soon as it starts happening, you know, your heart starts pumping. You're like, oh fuck, okay, this is what we're doing. This is amazing.
It's the closest anyone's come to making a John Woo video game. I mean, it is
exactly.
It's the real deal. It's so good.
Yeah, it's so good. And that's honestly not even an easy one to pick, just because there are so many really cool assassinations. The Vineyard one in particular has a lot. And you've got, like, I mean, the Murder Mystery House, there's one where you can manipulate a different person to murder your target for you, which is like a very like complex and very elaborate one, but that is a really good one. And there's lots of cool things like that in this game that are so much fun. But in many ways, for me, the thing that's remarkable about Hitman 3 is it gets my holy shit, that's right, this came out this year award, because this is the game, the only game on this list that when I played it, and my memories are so fully associated with this that it feels insane that it came out the same year with the rest of these games, is that this is the only game I played before I found out that I wasn't going to be at my old job and like starting the process of thinking about what that entails and then eventually moving to Texas. This is like a completely different world for me, is when Hitman 3 came out. And there's something very appropriate to that in a weird way. Like, it feels like this sort of like stage, like bookend almost of that period of my life, because when I played Hitman 1 was when I started getting into the program to get my teacher's license. And Hitman 3 came out like at the end of my time at that job that I got, like through a long chain of events that started meeting some people in 2016, starting that teacher program. Like, it's like a weird like perfect encapsulation of this like phase in my life that makes it like very weird to think about this game in context to the rest of these games, because it feels so much like a 2020 game to me, as like the end of 2020 is what Hitman 3 is.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And the things you said there about Hitman 2 versus 3 is really interesting to me, because Hitman 2 was my least favorite. I that's one where I totally respect and can like see the like why those levels are so good in the way you're saying. But for me, it was like it was just a little too open, and like I'm not quite as into I'm not as good at the patiently like walking around the game level following someone for half an hour to figure out what I'm going to do with it. And Hitman 3 just like for me was like right on the money with what I wanted. And I think that's one of the wonderful things. If you haven't played Hitman yet, you've got a literal world of assassination ahead of you, and I'd be really curious to know if someone was new to this, like, where would you fall on the list? And there's no wrong answer here. The right answer is just that IO made something really fucking special with these 3 games, and I hope we get at least a little bit more. I'd love some Hitman 3 DLC.
Well, Hitman 3 was so successful, because Hitman 3 is easily the most successful of the Hitman games. It is something that is very satisfying, because it just feels like spitting in Square Enix's fucking eye.
Yes.
Right? Because Square Enix... Hitman 1 was made while IO was owned by Square Enix, and then Square Enix divested themselves of IO, and IO went separate. When Hitman 2 was published by Warner Brothers, and Hitman 2 did well, but wasn't like, didn't sell millions of copies. And then Hitman 3 is a fully independently published game. Like, Hitman 3 is an indie game on this list, technically.
Yes.
And it is easily the most successful. Like, it was a huge fucking hit this year. So much so that IO originally didn't have plans to add new maps. Instead, they've been doing the 7 Deadly Sins thing, which I haven't really checked out. It's something I want to go back to, because I think it's mostly like escalation missions and that kind of stuff. But Hitman 3 was so successful that they are adding 2 new maps as DLC to it. That should come out this year, I guess. So
thank God, I am excited for those.
Yeah, and it is a very happy end to this world of the Hitman tale, that like this game, it was always so touch and go. It felt like it was such a stressful game to be such a huge fucking fan of, because it was like, like, oh my God. Like, I remember just like the feeling of like my heart dropping into my stomach when I saw that IO was being let go by Square Enix, and you didn't know what that meant for these games. And it was like, no, how could this happen? And then it coming around to ultimately them being able to self-publish Hitman 3, have it be the most successful Hitman game that's ever come out, so much so that they've changed their DLC plans because people like the game so much. Like, that's fucking amazing. And
you'll love to see it.
Yeah, and I'm happy that I will continue to be able to play Hitman and have fun with Hitman forever, because even if they didn't add new maps, there's more than enough Hitman in the Hitman 3 package to last you a lifetime.
Abso-fucking-lutely. Sean, that was my number 7. It was your number 7. So what is your number 6?
My number 6, I'm very happy to say, is Tales of Arise, a game I have mentioned for maybe like 3 minutes on the last podcast we recorded, because I had played like 5 hours of it or something. I have since spent, I think I've spent about 70 hours in the game, because I've done basically everything other than all the post-game content, which I do want to do in Tales of Arise. So this is a fun one, because I get to basically talk about the whole game. I will say that I am going to end up spoiling stuff, because I feel like I need to talk about why I like the game. So if people don't want to hear that at all, I'm not going to like deliberately go out of my way to like detail every single plot twist. But if you want to go in blind, just know that I'm going to talk about stuff from like the ending of the game. But Tales of Rise is fucking awesome. It is the first Tales game I've ever played. So I can't comment on how it relates to the other titles in the franchise. So I came to Tales of Rise extremely fresh. And I came out of it so just like invigorated by what this game is doing. And I think like probably like the way to start off this conversation is to say that I've been able to dust off an old award from 2017, an award I gave to Gravity Rush 2 that has gone ungiven to any other game, which is the Best Marxist Game Award, goes to Tales of Rise, because this game is Marxist and socialist as fuck, and it is amazing, and I had no idea that that's what the story was going to be about. But the story is like very directly about like you helping what starts as like a slave rebellion and then turns into you like symbolically destroying the system of capitalism and freeing everybody and building like a commune on your planet of Dina. and breaking the system of profit and exploitation and shit like that, all through like elaborate metaphor and symbolism. And it is the raddest fucking thing I've seen in the game in a long goddamn time.
I had absolutely no memory of you giving a Marxist Game Award, but it is. This sounds like it's the game for you, Sean. That sounds awesome. There's a rousing. I want the Game of the Year edition of Tales of Arise to have on the front cover Marxist Game of the Year from the Weekly Stuff podcast. We need to make like the logo, the trophy for that. It's like a bust of Karl Marx holding a like PS5 controller.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to kind of, I guess, like, detail a little bit of what I mean by all of that, I'll get to one of my other awards, is I give it the English Teacher Award for most effective use of metaphor, because it is like one of the most impressive uses of like elaborate symbolism and metaphor I've seen in like a fantasy story in a long time. Because the general sort of premise of the story is that, you know, it's this sort of fantasy with like sci-fi elements story where there are two planets, Dana and Reyna. And 300 years before the game takes place, as far as like you're told at the beginning of the game, the people of Reyna invade the Danan planet, and with like their advanced technology, they've got like little like sci-fi fantasy spaceship things that run on magic energy, and they subjugate the people of Dana, turning them into slaves, and use them to basically generate magical energy. Because in the world of Tales of Arise, magic energy is basically like spirit energy would be like the most direct way to translate the Japanese word they use. And people naturally generate that by living and working and doing things. And so at birth, Danans are implanted in their wrist this like magic gemstone, that as they live their lives and are forced into labor, that gemstone absorbs the like spirit and life energy they give off, and then it is like mined basically, and like taken from them and used to like power the technology in the sort of like the world that the more technically advanced Rainans live in. And that is a like very, I think, really powerful direct metaphor for like a Marxist analysis of what capitalism does, where the bourgeoisie or the like elite class is like mining value from the lives of the laborers, right? And it's through like the guise of products and productivity and consumerism and consumer goods, but like really what you're doing is generating value through the labor of the people you are subjugating, and then not fully compensating them for the labor that they're doing, and you giving them less money in the form of wages than the value that you accrue out of the labor that they do is what gives the bourgeoisie profit. And that's how profit exists. And that's like a basic Marxist analysis of profit. And so this whole system that exists between the Rainans and the Danans is just this big fantasy metaphor for the systems of capitalism, like pushed to this like fantasy magical extreme. And so that's sort of like the general world building setup that you're given. And then you have your two leads, one who's a Danan and one who's a Rainan. Your Danan, who's sort of your main lead, Alphen, is a man who is at the beginning of the game, he has this weird iron mask on his head that makes him not have any memories of where he came from or what his life was. And he also, and this is because of the mask, also you find out later, he can't feel physical pain. So, you know, he can still get hurt, but he just doesn't feel anything from it. And then you have the female lead of the game, Shion, who is a Rainan, but she has been cursed with this thing called the Thorns. That like what all that is, you find out through the course of the story. But basically, the curse means that anyone she touches feels incredible, like unbearable pain. And so that's like there's an obvious pairing there between the woman who can't touch someone without hurting them and the man who cannot be hurt. And that's sort of your basic setup. And there's so much that goes into the kind of sort of metaphorical application of those character types and character tropes. With Alphen, as you play the game, the mask starts chipping away and he slowly regains his feelings and regains his memories, right? But it's generally a metaphor for the like colonialist thing that the Rainans have done, and that actual colonialism does, of ripping away the past and like the history and the culture of the people that you subjugate, because culture and history brings people together and makes them more powerful. So him not having any memory of his life is stealing those things from him, and it makes him dulled. And then also taking away his like physical sensation of pain is his sort of survival response to this life of just like utter pain that he is constantly subjugated to by the ruling class. But one of the things that Tales of Arise understands, and this is what most of the story like ends up being about in the second half, is that freeing the Daemons and liberating them is only one part of what you need to do. The other part of what you need to do is to dismantle the system itself that creates the inequality and creates the oppression. And one thing you need to do that is understand that those systems oppress everybody that exists within them, right? It oppresses the proletariat class the most, but it also oppresses the people who are in the ruling class because they have no actual like free will or get to express themselves or their desires within the system. They are cast into a bourgeois role from which they can't escape. And with that comes, our sort of like modern alienation and our feelings of isolation from other people that capitalism like imposes on you. And that's very much like what the thorns that Shion experiences, what they kind of represent. And there's like everything in the game works like this. Everything in the game has this sort of like general metaphorical quality to it and symbolic quality that can be read in multiple different ways through multiple different lenses, through like colonialist lenses or through Marxist lenses. And it's just so impressive to me. It is just a really staggering feat, I think, of fantasy storytelling that has such a clear vision of what like oppresses people in society. And the title of the game, Tales of Arise, is so appropriate because it is about you rising up, right? It is about you throwing off these shackles of oppression and trying to build a better world for everybody. Involved in all that is one of the most delightful moments in any video game I've ever experienced. Just the form of like sheer joy I've felt when I realized what they were doing is the game has an Act 1, Act 2 type structure, where Act 1 is kind of the first 2/3 of the game, and it's about you going around learning about the different forms of oppression that the Rainans are imposing and learning about like how to throw that off, because also everywhere you go is a different version, like all the different kind of bottled societies is a different vision of, oh, here's like where there's not as much overt oppression by the Rainans, and it seems like it's a more equitable society, but actually like this sort of like polite facade is disguising the like other forms of oppression that are happening in the shadows of that world. And so there's lots of different variations of that theme that you see in the first act of the game, and then it culminates in you fighting a big crazy boss fight against this really cool character, and you know in the back of your head that there are a lot of other plot threads that haven't been resolved. So you know there's no way that this is going to be the very end of the game, but it has this big climactic feel. And then you beat that boss, and then a bunch of really crazy fucking shit happens, and basically your like objective gets shifted from, oh, we need to throw off the shackles of oppression, to, oh, our real objective has now been taken from us and moved into space where like the Rainans come from. And it like has like the victory has been like taken from, like you're about to get it and is ripped from you by this like mysterious character that has appeared in the shadows, and they fuck off into space, and you're left there being like, like you're in they went to space, what the fuck do we do about that? And it's this moment of like utter like kind of confusion in this kind of like Pyrrhic victory that you've just won. And then the game gives you a second opening theme and second opening animation. At the beginning of the game, there is a theme called Hibana that plays, and it gives you a big 90-second anime opening theme type thing that plays. And then at this midpoint of the game, they give you a new one as if it was like, here's season 2 of the show you're watching, like I Am Led to Orphan season 2 or something. And when that song starts playing, and it gets my Lisa Presents Best Anime OP Award, which is Hello Again by Ayaka, it is such an incredible moment of you seeing like, and it's this big like 2-minute animation. It's 30 seconds longer than what you'd usually get for this kind of thing. And it's this very solemn piano song that plays, and you get to see like the main characters wearing different costumes and all these monsters and all this shit, and this feeling of like, oh fuck, like this feeling of this is just like beginning kind of thing. And you move into the second act. And then the second act, I know that there are a lot of people, I've seen discourse online, who don't like where the game goes in the second act, but I think it is a really impressive version of the like JRPG, the main characters have to fight God and kill God kind of thing, where God is capitalism in this game. Like it's like very direct in its metaphor, and it is like so tied into all of the characters and their past, and all those things come to a head. And I understand why it gets way more abstract, and I think that's why people don't like it. But for me, I think it is like absolutely what the second act of the game needed to be. And then it culminates in my favorite probably ending of any game this year, which is the end of Tales of Arise, you have been built up the whole time, the relationship between the two leads, Alphen and Shion, who at like a certain point in the game, Alphen regains his ability to feel pain, which comes metaphorically with him rediscovering his past and learning like where he comes from and all that kind of stuff. And that means that he now physically can't touch Shion anymore. But obviously they're in love, right? They're the two romantic leads. It's like very heavily foreshadowed that that's where their story is going to go from like minute one of the game. And the end of the game is you freeing her from her curse, and that involving like basically killing this sort of like abstract god like entity, or like not even killing it, more like reforming it and kind of using that to break the system. And then being able to embrace and kiss, and that is the image that it then transitions into the credits with a second song by the musical artist Ayaka called Blue Moon. That is amazing. And then over the credits, you get these images of what happens after the game, of all the characters being able to go back to their lives, or like go in onto like new lives in this sort of like better world that you've built together. And then it starts showing you images of them all preparing the wedding for Alphen and Shion. And then the last image of the game is them at their wedding, and it's a close up of this beautiful hand drawn image of Alphen and Shion like embracing it at their wedding. And it is like the most happy ending and the most earned happy ending, because this game gets the Make Them Kiss award, which goes to Alphen and Shion, because the whole game, you're so desperate for these two really good people who have been struggling with all of these different character flaws and struggling to figure out where they go in the world and how they relate to each other, because they've both been hurt so bad, but they both like compensate for each other's flaws in the perfect way. And like that, it's the most satisfying moment when they finally get to embrace. There's also a very good symbolic image of like them mingling, and it's very sexual. There's literally a sword that is plunged into a flower, so the symbolism is not trying to be particularly like subtle with like the implications. But seeing like these two people get to have this sort of like romantic culmination and a game ending in a wedding, which is a very cliche Victorian happy ending kind of thing, but it's so earned here. It's the kind of thing that you just don't see, this kind of like almost kind of cheesy level of like how thoroughly happy it is. But because so much of the game is so dark and it stares so like clear-eyed into the face of like systems that oppress people, and it's so, I think, like smart about how it understands how those systems work, and how it hurts people even when you understand what those systems are, and you can't escape them. And it's like how much the game understands about that stuff makes the ending of you being able to build this community of friends and people and break those systems, and then being able to kiss and get married and like have this new future life. It is just like the most joyful ending of a game, and I absolutely fucking adored it.
That sounds so cool, and god damn it, I'm in the middle of Persona 5 Royal, so I don't know when the hell I would have time to play this game, Sean, but I really want to play this game. But I've got Royal, then I want to play Strikers, and then Elden Ring is coming out. So I'm on the playing long games until I die train.
Yeah, that's where we all are. One last quick award before we move on is I also have to shout out, I give it my Sega Bass Fishing Presents the Best Fishing Minigame Award, because any good RPG needs a fishing minigame, and the fishing minigame in Tales of Rise is awesome, because it's all tied into one of your party members, Kisada, who she just really loves fishing, and she just wants to fucking go fish. And there's all these like there's so much voiced dialogue between the characters in the game. There's like these little things they call skits, which are voiced scenes between characters that you can discover and trigger. And there are 400 of them in the game. And they're so good. And there's a bunch of them just specifically around Kisada fishing and getting all the boss fish in all the different lakes you can fish in. And you have different conversations with your friends as they marvel at these like crazy giant fish that you keep on getting. And it is the most fun I've had doing a fishing minigame ever, really. I think it's the best fishing minigame I've ever played. But it is a good fishing minigame always makes a game better.
And this was a good year for fishing minigames. I mean, Genshin Impact got its fishing minigame. I always love a good fishing minigame. So There you go. So your number 6, Sean, giant fucking game.
Uh-huh.
My number 6, a giant fucking game with a lot of story. My number 6, little game with no story. My number 6 game of the year is Bowser's Fury, developed by Nintendo. This was the game that was packed in with Super Mario 3D World in its Nintendo Switch re-release, but it is very important. This is a separate game. These are, you put in the cartridge or you download it. I didn't get this on cartridge, so I don't know why I said that. You open up the game, and it's kind of like a 2-game launcher. You pick which one you're going to play, and they're separate games. And you go into Bowser's Fury, and Bowser's Fury is just a completely new game, built with some of the mechanics and things from 3D World, but it's not actually in the style of 3D World at all. It's completely in the style more of the full... This is kind of a weird thing about Mario. 3D Land and 3D World aren't quite Mario 3D games, despite their title, because they're much more level, linear focused, and they have a lot of side scrolling in addition to sort of 3D movement. So they're not quite the same as like your lineage of Mario 64 to Sunshine to Galaxy. Bowser's Fury is very much the next game in the 64 Sunshine Galaxy Odyssey lineage, in that what it does is it takes the open-ended free roam star collecting that Mario Odyssey did, where Mario Odyssey, one of its big innovations was, instead of having to go back into the level for every individual mission, you can just collect all the different stars and stuff in the area all at once. Was one of the things Mario Odyssey did, and in doing that it also just had way more missions, way more variety, a lot more kind of quick-paced. And Bowser's Fury borrows that, and then it applies it to one big continuous open world map that is this sort of like big island area where the whole conceit, the game has, it's a Mario game, it has very minimal story, but Bowser has gone crazy, he's very big, he's stomping around, he's got a really crazy theme song when he's stomping around, it's great, but it's very scary, there's all this black ooze everywhere, and Bowser Jr. asks Mario for help because Bowser Jr. has, if you have not been following Mario games for the last like 10 years, has kind of become like the best Mario character, because he is this weird kind of spoiled kid who kind of knows he's spoiled, who kind of knows his dad is evil, but he loves his dad and he just kind of wants to impress him, but he's also knows that like Mario's the good guy, so when his dad is going out of control, he'll go to Mario and be like, Mario, can you help me stop my dad? I don't want him stomping around like this. And so Bowser Jr. becomes your sidekick in the game. And it's this open world structure where you go around and you find, in this game they are cat shines because it has the cat suit from Mario 3D World implemented very vociferously throughout the whole game. And it's basically your first sort of fully open world Mario, where you take what I think has been developed from 64 to Galaxy to Mario Odyssey and now put it in one continuous world with no walls in between. You know, you have to open up different areas of the world by getting a certain number of cat sprites, but there is, you know, there's no necessarily like direct guidance in where you need to go. There's no like one star you necessarily need to get before you get a bunch of other ones. It is just open, and it is a lot of environmental puzzles and finding things in the world and realizing, oh, if I get this and I start down this path, maybe I can get a cat sprite over here. I need to find this number of things. It is such a joy to sort of unfold this game and find everything that's inside it. I 100%ed it, and I had so much fun with it. It's the shortest of the Mario 3D World, Mario 3D games. It is like 6 to 10 hours long. I probably was more on the 10-hour side of things, and it's almost like a sample platter of like, it's almost like a sample platter of like what a future Mario game could be, because I think everyone who's played Bowser's Fury would very much like the next full Mario game to be in this style, because I think the possibilities for it are just immense. But I think that almost sells the game short to call it a sample platter, because it is so ludicrously effective on its own terms. I really do think it's one of the best Mario games ever made. In some ways, it might even be better than Mario Odyssey in some of its like core conceit. I think overall Mario Odyssey is the better game because it's the fuller game and it's the more like full creation. And I think that's the only thing that would hold Bowser's Fury from being higher on this list, is that it is a sort of small, like, kind of bite-sized Mario experience. But that bite is awfully delicious, and it also, I think, part of the benefit of it being so short is that there's no downtime in this game. It's all good stuff. I think the one mark against it might be the number of times you have to fight big, mega, furious Bowser, who comes in like every 20 minutes or so, and that can get a little annoying. But everything else, it is just hits top to bottom. There feels like there's no filler or slowdown. It is just the good stuff. And above all else, I think one thing that this game, if I were doing my silly awards, like you do, Sean, one of my awards would be the 3D Power-Up Award for finally, like, cracking the code of how to do power-ups in a 3D Mario game, because that has been a problem from 64 on through all of them is that it's kind of hard to figure out how do you do the fire flower and the Tanuki suit and all of those fun power-ups that are so crucial to the 2D Mario games. And what they do is that they take the mechanics from 3D Land and 3D World, which I think do the power-ups better than any Mario games, and just bring them into the 3D open world and give you this system where when you collect a power-up, it goes in like this little pouch you have, and you can kind of save and swap your power-ups on the fly. And I think they would, if they were to do this again, I think they would need to rebalance some of that for difficulty. But overall, it is your first sort of fully roamable 3D Mario game where you have all of the power-ups and things are designed around that. And that alone makes Bowser's Fury an absolute must-play if you like Mario. And, you know, just in terms of like packages that came out this year, there was not much more bang for your buck than the Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, because you got one slightly older game that's really damn good, and you got a brand new game that is really fucking good, all in one for the Switch. Really, really cool experience, and an obvious choice for my top 10, and it wound up at number 6.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember like when they announced it and everyone's like, okay, cool. Yeah, it makes sense. You're doing, you know, you're one of like the few Wii U games that didn't make it to the Switch. It was like, what the fuck is this? Is it a multiplayer? What is Bowser's Fury? What? And then I think everyone was just like so taken aback. It's like, oh, it's like a mini new actual proper Mario game. This like a new 3D Mario game. What the fuck is this, like this weird like Trojan horse package that you thought you were just buying an old Mario, but you actually got the next Mario.
It's really crazy. It kind of feels like they never wound up doing a sequel or DLC for Odyssey, and I kind of wonder if that's what this morphed into behind the scenes, and then kind of got combined with the 3D World thing, and, you know, whatever. It's to our benefit. It's a great game.
Very cool. It's always nice to have a Mario game out there.
Absolutely.
All right, so that's my number 5. Then is Resident Evil Village, or as I like to just call it, Resident Evil 8. Because I don't know, I like having my long franchises and just slap a number on that motherfucker. So because I had this as Resident Evil 8 for a very long time, and then I realized at the last minute I was like, wait, this is technically Resident Evil Village. I should probably write that down. Resident Evil 8. I don't know how much I need to say about this game. We talked about it a lot because this is another one where we both played it, so we have a whole podcast talking about Resident Evil 8, and it is just such a fucking fun game. Like it's just. So I guess one of my main awards that I feel like is kind of my thesis for the game about why I like it so much is I give it the Variety Pack Award for having so many flavors in one tasty package. Because what Resident Evil 8 is it is like a sampler of what Resident Evil has been throughout the history of the franchise. And you've got your like horror-y stuff, or you've got your like kind of like mansion, like exploration puzzle horror stuff in the Lady Dimitrescu section. You've got the like the way more hardcore early Resident Evil 7 horror vibes, that's a more kind of modern horror game thing in the Dollhouse. You've got the more kind of like actiony, like very kind of you know, schlocky B-movie horror action movie thing of like Resident Evil 4 in the 3rd and 4th areas, and it all kind of just comes together. Then also you have like a surprise, hey, what if Resident Evil was a Call of Duty game section right there at the very end where you play Chris, and that is also very fun. But it's just this cool way of looking back at the history of what Resident Evil has been, which is just one of like the coolest, most impressive, highest quality franchises in the history of games that has been going for so long. Like, you know, we'll be coming up on in a couple of years the 30-year anniversary of Resident Evil, you know, and it's this old franchise that is still kicking and still like being able to take where it came from and revamp it, you know, because I mean this game is fucking still first person like Resident Evil 7. It is you know, a lot of it is different, but the way it's able to capture the heart of what this franchise has been and how cool and fun it has been in all of its different iterations, and combine it all together into this one really cool package that also is a very satisfying sequel to Resident Evil 7. It's the kind of thing where, you know, after Resident Evil 6 kind of disappointed the world, and people were like, oh fuck, is Resident Evil done? Resident Evil 7 coming out and like paving this new path, and then Resident Evil 8 being this, and this is what it is. Like, this is the future of Resident Evil, and it is cool, and it is exciting, and it is Resident Evil while bringing all this new stuff to it. It's like more than I could have ever asked for from a new Resident Evil game. Because also I played through Resident Evil 7 this year, so that was like also part of it for me is kind of all that together. One of my other awards for Resident Evil 8 is Don't Fuck With This Guy Award, which goes to Ethan Winters, because this one of my favorite things about these games is just like the like totally unassuming protagonist guy that is like secretly the biggest badass in all of video games. Because Ethan Winters, it's just he comes up and gets crazy like dragon ladies and giant fish monsters and evil dolls and like fucking Magneto Man and all this shit, and he's like, no, fuck you, where's mine? You know, it's like he's not scared. He's going to kill every one of these fuckers. And that feeling of utter empowerment when you start getting to the later phases of this and also Resident Evil 7, of where it's like, no, I'm not afraid. I'm Ethan Winters. You fucker should be afraid. That turn is so fun and is to me the heart of what like I enjoy about Resident Evil. And Ethan Winters maybe like embodies that more than any other Resident Evil character, because he's such a like random dude who somehow is just also a complete fucking badass in the best ways possible. And then one of my other awards, because I really have to shout out this part of the game, is the best whatever the fuck that thing was award, which I pulled from the ending of Inside. I give that award to, and this goes to the fetus monster in the dollhouse, because what the fuck, that getting to the dollhouse and getting to that whole section is the most I've been scared by a game since I played PT. And that feeling of like, okay, so this game can do this shit too, and what the fuck. It is also one of the most fun things to see other people play on like live streams and stuff like that, is see people get to that sequence and like realize, oh, this isn't Daddy's Resident Evil anymore. This is some scary fucking shit.
Sean, I agree with you 100%, but I gotta say you missed a trick on your award name for this one, because this should have been David Lynch's Eraserhead presents Monster Baby Fetus Award 2021.
Okay, very good. So you can give it that because yes, that's very good. And then the last award I want to give it, because this is also true of Ratchet & Clank, is this is the other Game So Nice I Played It Twice award. This is the second game in the year that I played it, I beat it, and I immediately turned around and played it all the way through again, because it's just that. And I would have kept on playing it if new video games hadn't come out, because it is a game that I can easily see myself just going back to and playing through every couple of years, the way, like, you know, I've done that with Resident Evil 4. It's just one of those games that's just, like, feels like a perfect video game, and you don't get those very often.
It's a little higher on my list. I obviously loved it too, and it's one I've been trying to find the time to replay at some point. I fucking love it so much. I mean, I loved it so much, I went on a full fucking Resident Evil bender this year. I did part one of my Resident Evil bender last year, and then I went again even harder and like played the original, not remake versions of like 1, 2, 3, Code Veronica. Anyway, the only one I haven't played still at this point is 6. That's probably okay. Anyway.
Yeah, I wouldn't if I were you, like, based on because I didn't play it, and based on what I saw from it, you don't want to.
My number 5 is a game you absolutely want to play, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart by Insomniac Games. You already talked about it, Sean. We have a whole podcast on it. I don't need to say too much more on it here, other than, you know, I will echo what you said, Sean, about the visuals. This is the most next-gen game released for the new consoles so far. If you are someone who is lucky enough to get your hands on a PS5 and you want to know what should you play first is Astro's Playroom. But what should I buy first for this system to like make me feel like my $500 like gave me a new thing? The obvious answer is Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. Yeah. It is a must-own in every PS5 library. It is built around a conceit that literally could not be realized on older, not just older hardware, but like hardware that's not quite as tightly integrated as the PS5 is with its SSD. But it just soars so far based on rock-solid grasp of the fundamentals. It is tremendous game design. It is inventive and varied art direction that looks better than most animated movies in America. It is great writing of characters and a really fun, solid narrative. And it's all in this perfectly paced package that never overstays its welcome, always keeps you on your toes wanting more. The combat and shooting and weapons design is so damn good. And honestly, one of the reasons I think I'm not as in love with Guardians of the Galaxy as some people is because I played Rift Apart this year, and it is doing exactly what I think Guardians wants to be doing, but it is Ratchet and Clank, and they are the best at this kind of thing, which is we're going to give you a shit ton of weapons. Every single one of them is going to be fun. Every single one of them is going to be a little stupid and silly, and it is going to be just a bundle of fun to spend 10 hours, 20 hours in this game cycling through all those guns, especially when you get to those ridiculous sequences where And I think this is true of the Spider-Man games also. These games are at their best when they push you to the limit and make you use every trick in your arsenal to get through an encounter. And even, Spidey has one wheel. Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart has like 3 wheels at a certain point. So when you're going through everything in your arsenal, it's a lot of stuff, and all of it is so fun. I think the upgrade systems are great because they encourage you to use every gun in the game and find out different uses for all of them. It's got a phenomenal New Game Plus mode. All of it, it's just great. And I do think the narrative and character front is one of the most impressive things, because Ratchet and Clank are some of the most delightful video game characters in existence. I love my Lombax boy. I love particularly Clank because he is a little sardonic robot and he's wonderful. But I think the thing that's so impressive about this game is, after 20 years of Ratchet and Clank games, adding a third sort of main playable character in Rivet and mixing up that team dynamic where Ratchet is actually on his own for a lot of the game and Rivet and Clank are together for a lot of it. That shouldn't work as well as it does. That's a tough thing, I imagine, to do. And I think, part of it is you have Jennifer Hale. You can never have too much Jennifer Hale in a video game. And I think Rivet is such a winning, interesting character in her own right. And then, of course, you also have the robot who joins up with Ratchet. I forget her name at this point. But she's a cool character too.
It's like Katie or something like that.
Something like that. But it's wonderful. And yeah, every part of this game, even the music, I think, is like something special in this game. And you talked earlier, Sean, about how this game just makes you happy, and I think that's true. It makes you happy because it is so damn good. It has such a good grasp of its own tone and its world. And I really hope we get more of this, because Ratchet and Clank was missing in action for a while, other than the remake for the entire PS4 generation. And how cool is it to see them come back and just own the next generation so far? Certainly in terms of like technical aptitude, this game is something special.
Yes, and the name of the robot is Kit. I was very close.
Kit, you were very close.
Yes.
Kit is awesome too. All of them, love them all. That's my number 5. Sean, what's your number 4?
My number 4. This is the game that this always happens every year. Is there's a game that I'm not entirely sure where to put it, and I put it near the bottom of the list, and then slowly I realize, no, I like this game more than that one. No, I like this game more than that one, and then it worked its way up. And this is Returnal. Returnal is such a cool, like, out of nowhere game to me, in terms of it's a lot of, honestly, what I said about Persona 5 Strikers and its uniqueness applies to Returnal as well, because Returnal is a game that I think a lot of the broader like discussion around kind of misunderstood, I think, a bit of what the game is, because it's harder to classify than you would think. Because I think people jumping immediately to just saying that it's a roguelike is just not true. It's not really a roguelike. It is like a modern interpretation of what a classic arcade game would be, with like, third-person shooting and all that kind of stuff. And with that comes like hardcore death mechanics, because arcade games always had those, right? Rogue did not invent permadeath or like, having to go back to where you died and that kind of stuff. So Returnal gets one of my first awards for it is the Arcade Ain't Dead Yet, Not Really award for keeping the dream alive, which goes to Housemarque, which I think the developer Housemarque for Returnal has had one of like the coolest and weirdest journeys as a developer in the modern landscape of games, because they started doing, these kinds of arcade style classic games. Like a big one that people would know would be Resogun as that PS4 launch game, which is the best game that launched with the PS4, even if it was a little like arcade style thing. But they made a bunch of games like that. But after Resogun, not a lot of them sold particularly well. And there's like a very famous blog post that the CEO of Housemarque made a few years ago, where he said arcade is dead, and that they were going to change the style of games that they were making, because what they were making wasn't keeping the company afloat anymore. And then at some point after that, they must have gotten a deal with Sony. Like after the release of Returnal, Sony has bought Housemarque. But they've made this like third-person shooter arcade style game that has, like, you're fighting monsters that shoot giant glowing red and purple orbs at you in like conical patterns and shit like that you're navigating through. Like, it is a bullet hell game that is also a third-person shooter that also has like this cool abstract story that has this whole like elaborate horror vibe, and also has like really gorgeous next-gen level graphics that are, as good as anything else on the market, and like really pushing graphics in really cool ways. And it's this game that I just don't think anyone could really imagine Housemarque being able to find this way to blend the gameplay design roots of where they came from, with the sort of more elaborate modern AAA video game landscape and like the sort of the kinds of things one might expect from a more modern like mainstream video game. And I think Returnal is just this incredible fusion of those ideas that is giving you something that, again, like I think is kind of hard to fully define or fully classify. But one thing that I think is undeniable about Returnal is that it is the most fucking fun game to play. It gets my, and I've been rewatching this anime, which is why this popped into my head, but it gets the Kuroko's Basketball presents the Getting in the Zone Award. Because if people have seen the anime Kuroko's Basketball, which is a great show, it basically is a basketball show that has a concept where characters get in the zone like one does, and it's basically that show's version of becoming Super Saiyan, where your like eyes glow and all of a sudden you're able to run like 2 times as fast and shit like that. And that's what playing Returnal feels like, is you're like start slow and you're like sort of figuring yourself out. And I've been playing a lot and replaying a lot of Returnal in the past week, because as soon as I loaded up the game to be like, I should touch it again to see where it's going to be on my list. And I was like, and I spent like an hour playing it. I'm like, well, fuck. And I've been playing quite a bit of it. And it's that feeling of you building up momentum and just completely getting into the flow in that arcade game way, where you just like lose yourself. You feel completely sublimated into the game. Everything is just complete second nature. You're dodging every single hit. You're not getting hit like one fucking time. You're killing every single enemy. And that feeling of you just like playing the game perfectly, because the game demands of you this kind of like perfect level of play, again in this very arcade way, is so fun. And it's just, it gives you this kind of joy that I think is lost in most modern games, with like all the elaborate modern game kind of design mechanics and aesthetics that we have. And Returnal being able to sort of keep that core so effectively alive, while then still having all this other stuff that makes it appeal. Like it feels like it can take what it wants and what can improve it from more modern game design without ever compromising the roots of where it came from. And that's like a real profound achievement in game design, I think. One of the other awards I give it is the It's Particles, Jake Award for mind-blowing use of particle effects. Because this game, if you're talking about like next-gen games, at first glance, Returnal might not seem as impressive as something like a Ratchet and Clank. But when you're playing it, like you see why there is no way you could make a PS4 version of this game. What it is doing with particle effects is like true next level stuff. They did a big blog post and YouTube video on this, like Housemarque did, as well as you can see a Digital Foundry breakdown of it as well, if you want like more layman's terms on it. But basically, like almost every really notable piece of graphical like technology in the game feels like it's driven by this really revolutionary use of particle effects, where it's not just like the little orbs you shoot. It's also the way that like the tentacles on the like crazy alien monsters are designed. It's the way that pillars break apart is all driven by this really next gen, like really complex physics-based particle mechanic and like particle systems. And it gives the game this hugely, wholly unique aesthetic. The fog as well, which is I think one of the defining elements of the game's aesthetic. It's this like very deep Ridley Scott's Alien-esque kind of mist and fog effect that is also driven by the particle systems in the game. And it gives this feeling where playing the game feels unlike playing any other game you've ever played, because it is at this tremendous graphical fidelity. It runs at a super smooth 60 frames per second, and it is being able to draw a quantity of things on the screen with a complexity and a density you've never seen in any other video game you've played. And it's also without ever sacrificing the clarity one needs for this kind of very demanding, like hardcore shooter, arcadey kind of experience, which is one of the other things that's so impressive about its design. And then the last award I give it is one that originally I gave to Control, and I think it is very well deserved here, which is the Smash It Up Good Baby Award for Most Destructible Environments, because this is the thing that I always love in any video game, is if I'm going to have a fight in an area, I want that when I leave that area to it look completely unrecognizable as to how it looked when I entered it. And Control did that so well, and this game does it as well. It's like when you leave, everything's fucking destroyed. Pillars are demolished, like walls are ripped apart. Like everything is just like ripped asunder by like the ferocity of the combat encounters, and the way the physicsy ways in which things break apart and dissolve and explode is so hugely satisfying. It's a tremendously good time. And then on top of all of that stuff, like, you know, you would expect the gameplay to be so good, and it truly is so good. But then also the storytelling, while not certainly being the best story I've played in a game this year, it is really effective. And it's super effective at doing what it wants to do, which is establish this mood and this tone of like dread and despair, of this endless loop of you fighting on this strange, bizarre alien world, fighting monsters you don't really understand, and finding audio logs of yourself from previous loops as that version of yourself you're hearing in the audio logs is slowly going insane. And that whole vibe, and you coming upon this like weird version of your childhood house that there's like a monster inside of, and then you go in and explore, and there you have these weird visions. All that stuff really culminates in this mood that I think combines with the really satisfying action in a way that's really impressive. And the game does also have a really killer mid-game twist that I've wanted to talk about that I didn't mention on the podcast when I originally talked about the game, because the game was still relatively new at that point. But I do just want to mention, I love the mid-game twist so much because it does a thing I've always wanted in a cool time loop story, which is the game is 6 levels in total, split into halves. And the first three levels you play through, and you like kill the last boss at the end of level 3, and your character leaves the planet that you've been stuck on. And then you get this montage of her returning home, her like going back to her old life, her growing old, all this kind of stuff. And then eventually she dies of old age. And then she wakes up back on the planet. And she never really escaped the time loop. That she lived her entire life, and now she's back there again. Only everything has changed, and like 1,000 years have passed on the planet. And that's how they kind of break up the 2 acts of the story. And that realization as you start seeing that cutscene happen, and you're like, oh god, she's not really gone. Like, she hasn't actually escaped, has she? Like, she's going to be back in this hell. And that is like such a great mid-game twist to kind of kick you off into the second act of the game, which also kicks ass. So Returnal is this was a game that I, again, I was kind of surprised almost when I was making my list how high it ended up being. But I think it is like a really well-earned spot, and it's a thing where I think the game has done very well, and I hope like more people play it because I really want to see what Housemarque can do. Because if this is the first time they've made a game quite like this, I would really love to see what they can do with a fucking sequel.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's another one I want to make time for at some point. And between this and their last first game of the new generation, Resogun, they are good at particle effects. That is very clear.
Can't wait to see what they do at the launch of the PS6. It's like that's like how Smart just always says. Here's like one of the best games at or around the launch of a new PlayStation console. That's a cool thing to have.
It absolutely is. Speaking of games that definitely feel properly next gen, my number 4 is Forza Horizon 5, developed by Playground Games for the Xbox and PC, which is just, in addition to being an incredible, very, very next-gen experience, it is the most premium feeling AAA video game I played this year. Just this ridiculously refined and polished experience delivered in such an absurdly handsome, consistently awe-inspiring package that it really makes you feel like you are getting every penny of your $60 worth, or in my case, your Xbox Game Pass subscription. At every turn, it is just this game that makes you feel like you are being spoiled while playing it. I think it's almost like Playground Games has just been too good to you, making a game that plays this well. Every car feels so good, every area you drive in looks so cool, and every race event is so well tailored. It has so many fun activities to engage in. There's so much variety. I think Playground has really found like as many cool things to do with cars as you can do in a game where all you technically do is drive a car, but there's so much variety within that. There's so much visual majesty and variety. And then it is also, and I think this is an underrated part of Horizon 5, and it's been an underrated part of the series for a while now, it is so funny and light on its feet in its writing and delivery. It like builds little characters in the background with so much personality. I think particularly what they've done with the playable character this time, in really letting them have their own voice and personality, and in ways that they like interact with the other characters, is just so cool. Above all else, I think this game just wants you to feel so catered to. Like when you sit down to play it, it's prepared every inch of the table for you to have as much fun as possible. That has always been the Forza Horizon, MO, but I think the years of polish that this series has had, the visual awe and variety of the Mexico setting, which is just the coolest place to have a game like this, and the absurdly impressive next-gen showcase quality of the whole thing, where every time you boot up this game, and I'm playing it on the Series S, I'm not even playing the most, powerful version of this game, it is just a jaw-dropping showcase of what, the new systems can do, and Playground Games has always been at the cutting edge of video game technology with these Forza Horizon games, but I think Forza Horizon 5 takes it a notch up, and just overall, this is as perfect a like big AAA racing game as I think has ever existed or could ever exist. It definitely, I think it's probably good that Playground Games' next big thing is Fable and is not another Forza Horizon, because I really struggle to figure out how they're going to top Horizon 5, other than if Horizon 6 is, I don't know. I was going to say on the moon, but the moon wouldn't be as interesting. The moon would get pretty boring after a while, I think. I don't know where else on Earth you could do that would be quite as cool as what they've done here, but I would be excited to find out. This is a game I've talked about a lot on the podcast over the months as I was playing it, but I have poured a bunch of time into it. This is also the most I've gotten into a Forza Horizon game, because I crushed every single one of the XP boards and all of the fast race or the fast travel boards, so I got all of that done. I've done every race in the game. I've 100%ed like all the different things I can do, other than maybe like some of the hardest challenges getting 3 stars on. I still have to go back and clean up, and maybe getting like number 1 in every single race. But I've driven on every road. That alone was just fun. Was doing the part of the challenge of Horizon is you get a counter for every road in the game you've driven on. I think there were 574 or something like that in Horizon 5, and just at a certain point just driving around the map and going like, okay, that one's grayed out, I haven't been on that road yet, let's go drive on that road. And it's just, there's no goal other than driving around and looking at things and having fun, and getting into all of the I think it's a car racing game that has an absurd level of depth, because all the stuff from the normal Forza Motorsport games is in Horizon. All of that under the hood stuff you can do is in these games, but it's so accessible. And I think just some of the like little custom tunings you can do, it's so welcoming. It's a game that never wants to put any friction or time or resistance between you and the next thing you have to do, or you want to do. It's always just layering the table for you to go have as much fun as possible. It's slowly whittled away anything that would slow down you having fun in the game, and that is something that is so special. This isn't a game where I have a bunch of like narrative. This is not a game that like tears down Marxism, but it is a game that, like, in the simplest definition of a video game, which is part of your fun recreation time, you can't do much better than Forza Horizon 5.
It's interesting because so I've played a little bit of Forza Horizon 5 when I got my Xbox Series S, and it's almost, I think the thing you're talking about is kind of why I haven't played more of the game, is like, because it is like, I can see how it's very much a virtue, but like the sense of, and I agree with you, like the game is designed to eliminate as much friction between you and the game as possible, and it does feel like the game has just like set out this platter for you, is almost why like I don't feel compelled to come back to the game, because I think I really desire and thrive off of having like friction in game design. But like that's like a personal thing, but so that's not me really saying the game is bad in any way, just like that kind of design philosophy is not entirely for me. But one thing I did like about the little time I did spend at Forza Horizon 5 is seeing, when I would drive around, they, your friends list stuff would pop up sometimes, like leaderboard kind of things. Every once in a while, one of yours would, like, because I would have like some of my old friends from high school I haven't talked about in forever still play Xbox and have those games, and they would have like a modest like, oh, they drove on like 120 roads or whatever, and then like yours would pop up. It's like, Jonathan's driven on like 200 million roads, and it's like, oh my god, it's like every single time yours came up, it's like 20 times as much as anybody else I had seen. And I'm like always like, holy shit, Jonathan played more of this game than I thought. Oh my god.
I have played an awful lot of this game, and this was a really hard call, I have to say, between my number 4 and my number 3, and I was like swapping them a bunch. And it's the kind of thing, Sean, where you said the ranking doesn't matter that much. The ranking doesn't matter that much at this point. My 1 and 2 were the ones that were like super solid for me, and then like everything else was in like tiers. So this was really close, and you'll hear about my number 3 in a minute. But for now, I'll put this at number 4. The point being, one of the best games of the year, especially if you have Game Pass. Play this game. You will have fun with it.
Yeah, it's a good one. All right, my number 3. This is the second of my games that technically didn't originally come out this year, but it got the PS5 release, and fuck it, I'm going to put it on my list. This is Yakuza 7 or Yakuza Like a Dragon, whichever title you want to use. This is, you talked about it in your kind of honorable mentions or like secret fancy other list that you have.
My game's not quite of 2021.
Yes. This is like, fuck it, this is a 2021 game as far as I'm concerned, because I spent a lot of goddamn time this year playing this game. And it is so phenomenal. It is such a cool, revolution for the franchise, because it's interesting because, Jonathan, for you, this is your first Yakuza game. And then for me, this was like the first one I played that was new, right? Like the new one that I played when it came out, other than something like a remake like Kiwami or Kiwami 2. So this was the first time I got to play a Yakuza game like fully caught up on the franchise and having played every single mainline entry beforehand. And I think it's so cool the way the game is able to be so satisfying to both of those sort of potential players, because it is something that is totally open and free and accessible for anyone who's new. So you could just jump right into this one without having played any of the previous games. But if you have, there is like this is a Yakuza game. It's not a Judgment game. You know, like Judgment has its own thing that it does. It's got a general same vibe and setting, but it has 0 characters that intersect. And Yakuza Like a Dragon or Yakuza 7 is a proper sequel. Like it feels like it continues the story in a broad sense in the specific world of that is told through the Yakuza games. And things like, you know, this being the game that like kind of following a lot of what has happened in the past 5 or so years in Japan with the Yakuza is kind of like it's like the end of the Yakuza in the world of the game. Because they don't really have a place in the world anymore, and that society has shut like that shit down. And so, you know, the Tojo clan and the Yomi Alliance, which are the 2 major Yakuza clans that go back all the way to the original game and have been in all of them, shutting down in Yakuza 7. As like a fan of this series and who's played all of them, like a really cool, interesting story development that I didn't really see coming, and that like holds true for the whole game. I think one of the things specifically about Yakuza 7 that I love is how it takes like a lot of themes and ideas that have always been present in all of the Yakuza games about like the perspective of these games being from people who are on the margins of society and you kind of fighting to help those people. But like they have also always had like Kiryu as this character who has a very specific perspective and place in the world. And so taking Kiryu out of the protagonist seat and then getting this new protagonist, Kasuga Ichiban, just gives a whole fresh set of eyes and a different like perspective and a different way of exploring those same themes. And the game just feels so like of the moment in this sense of its heart being so like where it needs to be with the people that it needs to be with. Is so cool. And that all comes down to one of my awards to the game is Best Boy Award, which goes to Kasuga Ichiban, who's my boy. He's the best boy. Like, Ichiban is just the most infectious protagonist in any video game you could play. Like, you just want to be with him and, like, go with him on this journey and help him and see him be successful, because he is just the most compassionate fucking human being you have ever seen in a video game. But he's not Superman, right? He doesn't have the power of Kiryu, and so that's why he needs his friends. And I think that that's such a great construction for this JRPG-ified version of a Yakuza game, is having a character who has a similar heart as Kiryu, but needs people with him to like kind of see that heart and like put it out into the world and make the things that he needs actionable. He needs other people with him, including an award I'm happy to give that I gave last year to Ghost of Tsushima, with like a extra side award to Yakuza 7, which I hadn't played yet, but it gets to probably come home, which is the Akio Otsuka Presents Best Akio Otsuka Award, which goes to Akio Otsuka, because Akio Otsuka is in this game and he's fucking amazing. It is just an all-time great character and great performance. Like, we talked about it when we did the podcast on this game, but it's like one of his best roles in like a, you know, a very storied career, you know, with many incredible like legendary roles like Bato and Ghost in the Shell, and stuff like that, and Alexander the Great and Fate Zero. He's just or fucking Solid Snake, obviously, in Metal Gear Solid. And it's just, he's an incredible actor, and the character he plays is so good. Along with like the entire cast of characters is so much fun, and being able to run around this world with your buddies, be able to do your kind of Yakuza stuff, but with like a group of friends that is with you the entire time, is some of the most fun I've had in a video game this year. And just, it's one of the many things about Yakuza 7 that takes this franchise that is really near and dear to my heart and gives me something new while keeping like so much of what I wanted from before. So that's also where it gets the Passing the Torch award, for being able to sort of carry this franchise forward, which feels like very appropriate now, because also, you know, a lot of like a couple of the old level like top guys at the Yakuza or Yuga Gotoku studio, specifically Nagoshi, who's like the founder of the studio and stuff, have left. But, you know, with this like feeling of other people who have been with the franchise the entire time, and a new generation of developers and people at that studio being able to sort of like start with this with Ichiban and moving forward. And they've said already that, you know, Yakuza 8 is in production and Ichiban will be the protagonist, and it feels like this proper, like, the franchise can continue on, hopefully forever, because I'd never want these games to go away, because they're some of the best games coming out. Like, this is amongst the best Yakuza games. It is like up there with Yakuza 0, Yakuza 6, Judgment, and the other heavy hitters in the franchise. And it is also, it is a tradition for me on this podcast that whenever one of these games shows up in the top 10, I also have to give it this award, which is Yakuza 7. You also get the I Like Shenmue award, because you're not quite like Shenmue, but you are made by Sega, and you've got enough of the Shenmue DNA, and I do like Shenmue, and you get that as well, Yakuza 7. I love you.
I love it too, and I just want to take a second to talk about it here too, Sean. If this is the reason why I think I did a not quite of 2021 list, is because my favorite new game I played this year was, well, I was going to say, it's hard to say with Genshin Impact is this ongoing thing, but like in terms of a discrete one video game, it was Yakuza Like a Dragon. Like, yeah. I think this is one of my favorite games of all time. It's one of the best RPGs I've played. It's got the best cutscenes in any game I've ever played, because this is the one RGG Studio games I've played. I've got my RGG Studio sticker on my PS5. I'm looking at it right now. I'm happy to have that there. I adored this game. I adored the characters. You know, Kasuga Ichiban is one of the best video game characters of all time. One of the very best protagonists of all time. I think it's got this crazy fun, you know, silly JRPG battle system that is surprisingly deep. It is this great homage to Dragon Quest. It's got all of the fun stuff that you've been telling me about for years, like the crazy karaoke, where you get to hear Akio Otsuka do his thing, and fucking I love him. You know, I think the thing is, like, if I didn't take Yakuza Like a Dragon and Genshin Impact to kind of put them over here, it would have so overwhelmed my main top 10 that it would have felt like I had two mountains, and then I was saying, like, what were the best rocks on those mountains? And I feel like that is, like, dissing the other games on my list, and I'm not trying to do that. The reason I split it off is I wanted to celebrate these other 10, but I feel like, to some degree, they might have been overshadowed if I didn't kind of cordon them off. So I'm personally glad I did that. And we did a full episode on this. It's actually, I was looking through our old episode, Sean, and I forgot. But this was a great episode we did. Episode 376 is our Resident Evil Village and Yakuza Like a Dragon review. Is in one episode. That's from May of 2021, episode 376. So in terms of video game reviews, that's got to be one of the best episodes we ever did, because those are two fun games to talk about. And I love them both to death. Yeah,
you know, it's so good that I felt like I respect it, and I definitely see your reasons for making your fancy other list. But I was like, nah. After I played Yakuza 7, I'm like, nah, fuck that. This is going on this is going on my fucking top 10 list. Cause it's like I just can't, you know, I got to put it on the actual list, because it's you know, I needed to, especially because there are so few Yakuza games. I've played all of them, but I've played almost none of them in the year that they came out. So they don't get to be on the top 10 list. So I'm like, I can't let it happen to this one. It's got to be there. It's got to be on my actual list.
Well, there you go, Sean. I mean, you know, I'll keep the tradition alive of playing them in the wrong years. How about that?
There we go.
Although, when they make Yakuza 8, I will be there day fucking one. Yeah. Obviously. So, Sean, that was your number 3. My number 3 is a game that is this high because I love it, and also a little bit because I think everyone's forgotten it came out this year, and there were a lot of people who liked it, and I think people have forgotten it, and they shouldn't, because it's this fucking good. It's an indie game called Cyber Shadow, developed by Mechanical Head Studios, which is really just one guy. It's a Finnish developer named Arne Hunziker. He did all of the design and art and everything in this game, and then the music was composed by Enrique Martin. And it was published by Yacht Club Games, who are the makers of Shovel Knight. They did not make the game, but they did publish it. And I think it is fitting that they published this one, because it is a very different game than Shovel Knight, but it is, in the same way, it is a callback to NES 8-bit style games, but doing it better, frankly, than any of those games ever did. Cyber Shadow is just such a phenomenal masterpiece of game design that I am in such awe of, that it had to rise this high for me. If you don't know what Cyber Shadow is, it is very much in the way that Shovel Knight is sort of a callback to your... I mean, DuckTales is one of the obvious examples, but a lot of your sort of 8-bit platformers. Cyber Shadow is very directly a callback to Ninja Gaiden and to Shadow of the Ninja, I think is the other one that it is sort of calling back to. It is a amazingly paced games. It is one of the best paced games I've ever played in terms of game design, where you start with basically nothing. You're just a ninja, and you got a sword, and the sword strikes, and that's it. And you can hit stuff with the sword, and that's all. And it slowly, with every level, gives you a new power or ability that fundamentally alters how you play and interact with the game. And then it gives you a big, intricately, beautifully designed level where there's plenty of opportunities to learn and master these new abilities and how they interact with your other abilities. You're always moving on to the next thing before any one thing gets old, but then it also does the thing that Doom 2016 did so perfectly, where there's ample space at the end to use everything you've collected and really have to show mastery of everything you've gotten. And there's these big challenging levels at the end that ask you to use everything. It is just such an absolute masterclass of game design top to bottom, from the platforming to the combat to the abilities. The basic loop of the game is moving between checkpoints and mastering everything in between them. I think the recent game it reminds me most of is Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, which is not surprising because Sekiro is also very inspired by Ninja Gaiden, and sort of that lineage of games. It's this kind of game where when you pull things off, when you pull off a sequence from like A to B to C, it feels less like you are playing a video game than like you are executing a dance or perfectly playing a piece of music. There's a real rhythm and flow to it, and I think you almost enter a flow state when you're good at it. And it's that kind of thing that few games can genuinely achieve. And I think Sekiro is the one I think most obviously of this with, because Sekiro is so almost balletic and rhythmic. But pick your FromSoft game. I'm sure Nioh plays into this as well, where when you get good at it, it feels like you got good at something, right? It's not like it's not like a video game where you feel like I did something. I won that race in Forza Horizon 5. Yay, I roomed fast. Like, there's something about doing this in Cyber Shadow where you're like, fuck, I'm good at this thing. I can't believe this was really hard and now I'm good at this thing. And there's something, it's almost intangible, but I remember, Sean, you describing that idea in Sekiro of like, you know, I would say like to you, Sean, like, man, this boss is too hard. He just comes at me too fast. And you're like, Jonathan, when you're good at it, he's going to feel slow. Like you're fucking Morpheus in the Matrix saying, when the bullets come, you won't have to stop them. Like that kind of thing, right? Yeah. I know I misquoted that line. Anyway, that's totally what happens in Cyber Shadow as well. When you get good at this thing, it feels like time slows down around you. And I think one of the other thing I just fucking adore about it is it's all wrapped up in this exquisite 8-bit package that, like Shovel Knight, both nails the feeling of an 8-bit aesthetic while expanding on it to do things you just couldn't possibly do on the NES. Like, it has NES-style visuals with way more detailed backgrounds and way more detailed animations and character sprites and all this stuff, and way more stuff going on screen than you could ever pull off on the NES. And then you also have a soundtrack that is such a fucking banger. It is so good. Again, it's a guy named Enrique Martin. Outstanding soundtrack that is just like, go listen to it on YouTube. Sadly, they have not released an official soundtrack yet, and I really, really want them to, because I would pay good money to have that in like my iTunes library. But it is a hell of a thing, and it rises to number 3 just on like raw fucking game design. Great art direction, phenomenal music. It's got a surprisingly intricate story that involves like and to be honest, I don't know if I remember or understand all of it, because like I said, it's surprisingly intricate, but it's this whole thing about you are part of this like unit, you're a ninja, you're also kind of a robot, and you're going to find like your master. You're in this city called Mecha City. There's all this like conspiracy thing going on. There was this clan that was betrayed. There's a whole part where you like go to the afterlife, and there's a special dragon you talk to, and then the dragon gives you its powers. It's rad as shit. There's some real heavy metal imagery in some of those like dream sequences. But it is a surprisingly involving story as well. So, hell of a game. It is on Game Pass. That is actually where I played it, because when I got my Series S, I just downloaded a couple things, and this is one of the ones I did. And I actually wound up playing it not with my like fancy Xbox Elite controller, but with the Series S controller, because it has such a good D-pad. And that is like, if I were to give a silly award, best D-pad award is going to go to that Series S controller, because if you want a game to test the effectiveness of your D-pad, Cyber Shadow has a lot of like moving back and forth fast stuff, and oh my god, that D-pad is so good. It is part of why I had so much fun playing this game, is it was just like the perfect controller for it. So Cyber Shadow, great game. You can get it on anything though. It's on Game Pass, but it's also on PC, it's on PS4, it's on Switch, so go play it at your platform of choice, but do play it and don't sleep on it. I think this was like a February release, and I've seen a lot of outlets that praised it at the time just completely forget about it, and that's too bad. It's a really special game.
Yeah, you're right, because I remember you talking about it, and I remember when the game came out that like it did get a lot of really good reviews and praise. But yeah, it is definitely one of those games that if you're like a big indie, or like if you're like an indie kind of darling or whatever, or kind of smaller game that gets a lot of praise, if you come out in that first half of the year, I think they just get swept away, right? You gotta like, if you're released like sometime around the summer, that's like the window where you might be in the conversation for GOTY stuff, just because that's the way that people work, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome.
That's my number 3, which means we are in the home stretch. Sean, what is your number 2?
My number 2, coming up from Yakuza 7, is the other Yakuza Studio game that came out this year, or I guess the only Yakuza Studio game that came out this year, depending on how you define what came out this year. And this is Lost Judgment. This game is fascinating because I think it is like both in some ways the most crowd pleasing of all of these games in terms of like the side content and the amount of side content and like how good it is, and then also the combat, which is just incredible. But it is also, in terms of its core story, I think maybe the most like kind of challenging and complicated this series has ever been in terms of like what themes and ideas it's exploring. And it feels very appropriate for this sort of like sub-franchise or spin-off or whatever of the Judgment series that is not about, you know, Yakuza or ex-Yakuza people. I mean, it's important to say the Yakuza franchise is never actually about people who are in the Yakuza, because the only point in which the protagonist of a Yakuza game is actually an active member of the Yakuza is at the very beginning of like the first hour of Yakuza 1 and the first hour of Yakuza 7, and that's it. And there's no other point in the history of this franchise where your playable character is actually a member of a Yakuza gang.
Well, and it's important to say they're not called Yakuza
yes.
in Japan for that reason, I assume.
Yes, yeah, they're called Like a Dragon or Yuga Gotoku. But Judgment is about, Yagami, this other character played by Kimura Takia, a very famous television actor in Japan. And that first game was amazing, and this really incredible noir story of you investigating this like serial killer and it tying into this like big pharmaceutical conspiracy and all this stuff. In Judgment was one of my favorite games of, I think 2018 is when that came out. And Lost Judgment is a fascinating thing of how do you make a sequel to that game, because it's not as straightforward as I think you would expect, because Yagami is not like Kiryu or like Ichiban in terms of a protagonist for one of these games, and that he is a like more complicated character. He feels more like an actual human being. Like Kiryu feels like a superhero, like a classic superhero. He's this like unmovable brick wall, right? Like the main thing that you need to happen in the plot of a Yakuza game starring Kiryu is for him to, one, understand exactly what the problem is and who is causing it, and two, put him in the same room as whatever's causing the problem and him being able to punch them. And then that's what the end of every Yakuza game is. And so the plot has to be, how do you keep that from happening for Kiryu for long enough for like all the plot developments to occur? Kasuga Ichiban's not quite at that level, but he feels like a more modern version of that character that's a bit more human and a bit more flawed. Whereas Yagami is like, he's like a really flawed person who is like, particularly in the first game, suffers from a lot of like self-doubt. His backstory is very tragic in terms of like, and not just like he came from a tragic childhood, which he did, but also his life as an adult before the beginning of the game was like marked with tragedy, and he failed this like case that was really important, and it ended up getting this woman killed, and he was disbarred, or he wasn't quite disbarred, but he was completely disgraced from the profession and like walked away from being a lawyer. And over the course of that first Judgment game, you solve that case and you like clear your name and you figure it out and you break this massive conspiracy. And so Lost Judgment is like, what do you do with that character in one of these stories with a character like Yagami, who has now finished that character arc, right? Like Kiryu post Yakuza 1, he's at the top, like he's at the top of the mountain. He's like, reached nirvana or whatever. He's like figured his shit out. And how do you tell this kind of more noir, more morally gray story with a protagonist like that? And I think Lost Judgment's conclusion is really interesting, of where it is like about Yagami having to struggle with like not punching the bad guy, but like convincing the bad guy of that like what he is doing isn't going to bring about the change that he wants. And ultimately Lost Judgment is this game that it reminds me of Persona 5 in some ways, that it is like deeply cynical about the way that the legal system works. And it basically, at the end of the game, Yagami straight up just says the legal system doesn't really work. Like we should try to, like, as a society, to try to make it better. Yes. But Yagami has chosen not to return to his profession as a defense lawyer because he doesn't believe in the law anymore. Not really. And instead says, I'm going to be there on the sidelines so that when people fall through the cracks of the legal system, I will be there to help them in my own way, in a way that's different from you, indicating the antagonist, who's like this serial killer trying to, reform society through these means that aren't going to actually be particularly productive. And that, like, journey that Yagami has to go on of just, like, having to convince the people around him, one, of, like, the system isn't going to work. The system's not really going to solve this problem. We should use the system, the legal system, as much as possible to our advantage, but we have to solve this on our own and bring the truth to light, because the truth at the end of the day is the only thing that can be fair to everybody, and the only thing that, like, that we can do to make sure that we can have the best outcome possible. And really what the game is ultimately about, and I found this very fascinating, and this is where it gives probably the most academic award I'll give to anything, is the Howard Zierer presents the Restorative Justice Award for just fucking getting it. Howard Zierer is a like political theorist from the 1990s who's like one of like the modern like originators of what we now think of as restorative justice. But yeah, Lost Judgment is about saying, get rid of like our retributive justice like ideas in the way that society is structured around punitive and retributive justice. Retributive justice being the thing the antagonist of the game is trying to practice out through his serial, like, killing people who have been bullies and driven people to suicide through bullying. Because all this game is also like centered around a case that involves a school and bullying in this one school. And Yagami's solution is like, you can't solve those problems that way, because all you're doing is trying to like treat symptoms and get rid of like bad apples after the fact, instead of trying to like fix the scenario that creates the bad apples in the first place. And the whole goal of restorative justice, and the thing that Yagami is trying to practice in the game, is building a community where these things can't happen. Building a community that is honest, that is open, where there is trust, and where the truth is open and accessible to everybody. And that is like the most important sort of practice in restorative justice, is it is about creating an open and honest community. And for people who don't know like restorative justice stuff, like it is a big thing in schools, and it's why I'm like really passionate about it, because it is a much, much better like in research driven model towards things like punishment or whatever, and behavior modification in schools for students that are behaving in ways that feel inappropriate. And it's way better to employ restorative justice type interventions rather than sending them to detention, or doing like, the old Bart Simpson thing of writing this sentence a million times on the chalkboard, whatever, hitting kids with a ruler, all that kind of shit. Like, none of that works. It only makes things worse. Just like murdering people as a serial killer is only going to make society a worse place, not a better place. It's not going to solve these kinds of problems. And my favorite thing about Lost Judgment is that the game is about you as the player putting that shit into practice, because the whole core of the game is about this elaborate setup at the school of Yagami investigating the case. And to do that, he's basically installed as a counselor, more or less, for this one club, the Mystery Research Club. And through that position, you like help out all these other groups of students in their own little clubs. And that is one way for them to get the, what I call the Mini Games Lifetime Achievement Award, because this has the most and best mini games I've ever seen in any video game. Like, it is this team on fucking crack with all like the mini games they have ever made, which are huge, elaborate. Like, even calling them a mini game is like a disservice to what they actually are. And this game has like, where most games have one or two of them in this franchise, this one has about 5, and it's fucking nuts. And all of those different clubs have their own stories associated with the mini game, and it's all about you going and helping these kids and helping those clubs create their own like restorative justice based, like open, honest community with each other, and then expanding that out to where now all the clubs are connected. And then the conclusion of that school storyline, if you do all of it, which is super rewarding, is seeing all of these groups come together as one big group to help one student who is troubled that they need to help out. And it's like a really touching moment that to me, if you are playing Lost Judgment, or if you have played Lost Judgment and you didn't see all the school stuff to its conclusion, like you've missed like a huge part of what the game is doing, because that is to me the core of like the model that Yagami is preaching at the end of the game is all explored through that school environment. Obviously, this game hits me in a particular way because I've been working as a teacher. And the very ending of the game has a scene that like utterly emotionally bowled me over, where at the beginning of the game, Yagami encounters this group of students when he's coming to investigate the case for the first time that is bullying somebody, and he like intervenes and stops them. And then those characters who are the bullies become major characters over the course of the story, and you kind of help learn what their problems are, figure out like what's going on with them, like seeing the complexity of like why bullying happens, which is always a failure of a community, not a failure of an individual, particularly when you're talking about juveniles. And at the end of the game, you have a similar scenario where you have some students bullying another student, and then the students that you have helped out, they're the ones that step in and intervene, and put into practice like the philosophy that Yagami's been preaching. And that scene immediately follows him giving the speech about saying that I'm going to be there to help people who fall through the cracks, and I'm going to like save them in a way that's different from you, person representing retributive justice. And it cuts to this scene where those students, unprompted from anything, go and step in and like help their own community. And like there's something about that hit me really hard, because I've seen stuff like that actually like at my old job. And so this game, it is like one of the best games the studio has made. It's certainly got, I think, the best of all of the action combat these games have ever had. It's got the best mini games that these games have ever had. But the core story and the very thorny moral issues around justice and bullying that they talk about is very, I think, really thought-provoking, and feels like it comes from this very interested place in thinking about what are better models than like the standard models we think of for justice in the world. And you know, I don't think the game is necessarily 100% perfect in that regard, and there's certainly some criticisms to be made, but it is a kind of story that I think I've rarely seen done like this, with the kind of like philosophy that this game has. And I rewatched the game's last 30 seconds or 30 minutes or so yesterday when I was putting together the list, and seeing that ending again, and I had the same emotional reaction like 6 months removed from playing it originally, and I was like, yeah, no, this is going to be up there on my list. So Lost Judgment is my number 2.
That's awesome. And I will say, of every game I didn't get to in this year that I've wanted to get to, it's been Lost Judgment is the one I want to get to most. The problem is I need to play Judgment and then play Lost Judgment. And I want to play both of those, and I just need to clear the deck and find the time, because they're big games. But yes. Especially after playing Yakuza 7, man, I'm very motivated to get to these games, and Lost Judgment sounds absolutely wonderful, and I'm glad to hear you talk about it more.
It's a great fucking game.
My number 2 is a game I know you also think is great, because it was your number 5 or something. Resident Evil Village, Resident Evil 8, Resident Evil 8-age, depending on how you want to read that title. Developed by Capcom. And you know, it's just so funny. I'm looking at my notes here, Sean. You just stole everything I was going to say about it, because you used the exact same concept, which is that Village is kind of like Resident Evil's greatest hits. It is a journey through a haunted mansion like Resident Evil 1. It is a creepy European town with larger-than-life characters like Resident Evil 4. It's got these big, crazy horror ideas like you get in 2 and 3. It's got balls-to-the-walls action like Resident Evil 5 even in places. That's what I would say the Chris thing is kind of doing, is your, like, you know, big, crazy action stuff with zombies. But, you know, I think it is the best like love letter to and evolution of what Resident Evil is that I can imagine. It takes the reinvention that Resident Evil 7 nailed so thoroughly in the move to first person and kind of modern conceptions of video game horror, and it just goes to the next level with it narratively and in terms of game design. I don't think it's necessarily the best Resident Evil game. There are a couple I would put above it, but it might be the most Resident Evil game in that if you wanted to tell someone what is Resident Evil, I would sit them down and play them through Resident Evil Village, and I would say it's all of this. And Resident Evil is, you know, one of my very, very favorite video game franchises. And part of what is so wonderful is it is so eclectic, and it is so weird, and it is so unbound from any sense of like clear logic or tradition in what it's going to do. And somehow it all hangs together as a series despite that. And somehow Village hangs together as a game despite being kind of all over the place in what it's doing. But what it does is so wonderful. If you've only played some Resident Evil, even if you've only played a little bit of it, I think it would be obvious that like this is one of the year's best games. It's just general sense of design. The way, every individual part of it is like, it's so perfectly paced. Everything is so well laid out. It has such memorable moments. It's got phenomenal graphics and presentation and acting and all of that. It is so unhinged. It has this sick, fun sense of humor. You did not give an award to Ethan getting his hands cut off over and over again. So I guess I've got to give a, put our hands together for award, which is Ethan getting his hands cut off over and over because it's the best thing. It also, I think, gives us by far the scariest stretch of game this series has ever devised, which is the David Lynch's Eraserhead presents Fucked Up Monster Baby Award. There's just tremendously atmospheric art direction and graphics. You've got memorable characters like the salesman in this game, the big guy, and just it's so good. And it's this gripping and twisty story. I think it would be obvious that this is one of the year's best games, even if you don't really like Resident Evil. But if you do like Resident Evil, this is just such a gift of a game. It is the full package. It is the real deal. I don't know how you could be down on this game in any way. It is wonderful, and I will second everything you said about Ethan Winters, who is somehow one of the best things that ever happened to Resident Evil, particularly, I think, in how far they lean into it in Village, and then find a way to narrativize it and wrap it all up in a way that makes this little 2-game saga one of just the best high water marks in this franchise's history. Coming after it felt like Resident Evil was kind of dead with 6. It felt like there probably wasn't a future here. There's a bright future, and I think Village gives some really cool hints at what they could do next. But even if they don't, even if that's not where they go, this was a perfect little 2-game saga. I am very excited at some point to sit down and do a replay of 7 and 8 together, kind of back to back, and see some of, because 8 really reorients some of what you saw in 7. And I can't recommend them enough. And, if you are someone who's new to Resident Evil, I would definitely play 7 before 8, but you can start on 7. You will have a fun time. There are Easter eggs and stuff that you would, only get if you've played the other ones, but don't feel like you have to go through and play all of them. Definitely, there's the bundle package on the systems where you can just get 7 and 8 together. That is a very good way to enjoy these games.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's Resident Evil 8. Fuck yeah. It's like what
this was my easy number 2, because this was my number 1 for a while until I played my actual number 1. This was an easy one. Yeah. Number 2, fucking love it. Lady
Very
Domitrescu, she gets the Step on Me award for I'm kidding.
I thought about doing something like that as a joke. I'm like, as I started to write it, I'm like, no, I'm not going to do this.
It was below you? Okay.
Yeah, it was I couldn't find a way to write it that was funny enough, but not too creepy. And I abandoned the joke.
Okay, I think that's probably good. Sean, that was my number 2, which means it is time for you to tell us what was your favorite game of 2021.
My number 1, this was very easy, although it is an unprecedented thing for me to do on this podcast. My number 1 game of the year, 2 years running, is Genshin Impact. Specifically, Genshin Impact 2021. This was a thing I knew pretty quickly when some of the 2.0 stuff started coming out that this was inevitable. I do want to make it clear. Me giving this to Genshin Impact has nothing to do with because of the PS5 exception rule. This is based on, I've done this once before. A couple of years ago, I gave Dragon Ball Legends Year 2 my number 10 spot on a list in recognition of the fact that video games these days are very often not one-and-done products. And it's kind of hard for this kind of stuff, as evidenced by the fact, Jonathan, that you need a weird second special list for your list.
Yeah.
It kind of is hard to look at video games solely as this is a thing that you put out and you play and then it's done and you contain it and you put it in a year-based list. And Genshin Impact is the game that I think has kind of killed that concept in many ways. So it feels most appropriate to me to just say, Genshin Impact 2021. I was going to call it Genshin Impact Year 2, but since Genshin Impact came out at the very end of 2020, it felt weird to call this Year 2 because it's really basically Year 1. But Genshin Impact 2021, which is all the content that they've released this year, which would be versions, technically the last 3 weeks of version 1.2, but let's just say version 1.3 to version 2.3. That is the content that I'm sort of I looked at and considered for its placement on this list. And it is an easy number 1 for me, really. There's nothing really that comes close. I mean, if we made my top 10 favorite video games ever list, Genshin Impact would be on that list now. I think there's absolutely no doubt about that in my mind. And there are a lot of reasons why this gets and I'm very happy to be able to give it this award because it has been a running joke on my list for a lot of different reasons for different games. This is my 2021's 2020 Game of the Year award, literally. This isn't like a weird, Persona 5 was my 2017's 2016 Game of the Year award because technically played it out when 2016 when it was Japanese. No, this is my 2020 Game of the Year, is also my 2021 Game of the Year. Let me detail a little bit of the content that they have put out in this calendar year. So this year they have released 18 characters. They released Ganyu, Cho, Hu Tao, Rosaria, Eula, Yanfei, Kazuha, Ayaka, Yoimiya, Sayu, the Electro version of the Traveler, Raiden Shogun, Kokomi, Kujosada, Toma, Aloy, Arataki Ito, and Godo. So they have released 18 characters, and I do have most of them. I think there's 2 of those characters I don't have. I don't have Sho. I think I don't have someone else in there. But I have most of those characters and have played as all the ones on that list that I have. I've played quite extensively. So that is, and all those characters are very different. They're really unique, and every time they've released a new character, I think they have proven themselves to know what the community and the game actually needs in terms of characters. Because one of the things I'll say about why I put the game and it was easy for me to just say, nah, I'll just put it in consideration for this list, is that this is the year where Genshin Impact had to prove itself, right? When we talked about the game at the end of last year, the game had only been out for a couple of months. All the content and the events and stuff that they had released were all things that were well into development already before the game had hit 1.0. So this was the year where Genshin Impact had to prove it could be the game that it was. It could be this really high quality open world JRPG action game while running and add new areas and new content and new characters and stuff while having to maintain an ongoing game. That was, I think, a really open question that I talked about in our last podcast for our last Game of the Year podcast. Was I didn't know if that was something feasible, if they would be able to add content at a rate that would work, because there is no other gacha game, there's no ongoing game that is like this, that has the pace that it needs of a gacha game with the level of content one would expect of a big AAA open world game. And so seeing them release 18 characters this year and have them all be different, have them all be unique, and them avoid the problem of most other gacha games, which is power creep. Most of the really powerful characters in the game are still some of the early characters. Ganyu and Hu Tao are 2 of the best DPS characters in the game. Bennett and Jingchu are still 2 of the best support characters in the game. If you want to make a good team in Genshin Impact, you don't need any of those 18 characters to make a team that's as good as any other team, because it's not about them adding characters that are better. It's about adding characters that are different and fulfill different niches in the overall combat structure of the game, as well as obviously different narrative elements that are, characters are more than just their gameplay. That's also their design and their story, and all those are also awesome. Because one of the things I really encountered with Genshin Impact this year that I didn't really know so much about it last year is I mostly had only used one team that I modified a little bit based on characters I got by the time 2020 ended, and that was my Tartaglia, Xiangling, Chi-Chi, and Beidou team, which is a good team, but I could kind of played that team all the way through to the end of 2020 into the Dragonspine stuff. And this year, what I've really found is most fun is coming up with new teams and getting characters and figuring out what kind of combinations you can do, where you can put them on their team, how you can maximize their play styles. And so being able to get a character like Kokomi and being able to have her, and when she came out, it really revolutionized the way I used my Eula team, who is one of my favorite characters to play as in terms of one of my main damage dealers. And my whole Eula team completely changed, and my playstyle with that character completely changed because I figured out a better way to use her, because Kokomi added a new dynamic to that team. And that's proved true with basically every major character release. With the most recent one being Ito and Godo, who Godo is a 4-star character. And I managed to get Ito right at the last second before the banners changed. And so now I'm using a full Geo team of 4 Geo boys running around together. And that is a completely different playstyle. I've never played the game quite like that, because I've got Ito as the damage dealer, Godo is a Geo support, Zhongli, who's a Geo shield support, and then Albedo, who does damage off field, and all 4 of them together, and they all synergize together, and it's so cool, and it's a totally different play style. So the characters have been top notch, with obviously the character of all characters in this game, my favorite character, Raiden Shogun, This is where, of course, I have to mention that I have been empowered, of course, by the estate of Miyuki Sawashiro and the people that represent her to award this game a very special award that I wanted to give to the game last year and couldn't because she wasn't technically in the game yet. But I am happy to say that this year in 2021, Genshin Impact has awarded the Miyuki Sawashiro's Award for Peculiar Excellence. Because this game is truly an excellent game and it is completely peculiar. There's nothing quite like it. And Miyuki Sawashiro's character, Raiden Shogun, is like what she does in terms of her playstyle is so cool and so much fun. And two, she's just fucking cool as shit. She is so cool. And I believe that some leaks have indicated that the next update is going to have a new like story chapter for Raiden Shogun. And that is very exciting. Because she is also the character, as far as I know, that has sold the most of all the characters. Like her banner was the most popular. So people have good taste. Is what I would say with that.
I feel like, Sean, if you had a trophy that you gave out every year for this, you would have to now like have Raiden Shogun carved into it for every future year when you send it over to the developers.
Yes, yeah, it is definitely Raiden Shogun would be on there of the trophy for sure. Other things about Genshin Impact that came out this year. So we've had a lot of different festivals, which have all been very fun. The Lantern Rite Festival, which now they're doing a new version of it, I think will be the next update. The Windbloom Festival. There was the Summer Festival with the Golden Archipelago Islands. The Moonlight Merriment Cooking Festival, and they recently did the Snow Festival. And all these have been really fun little festival events. I will want to really shout out the Cooking Festival for having the most surprising story of anything I've encountered in any game this year, which is the Guoba story. For people who don't...
It's so good. It's so good, Sean. Oh my God.
It's so unbelievably good. The Cooking Festival is one of my favorite events they've done, where one thing it delivered was a thing I've wanted, which is more interaction between the different characters, because you get a lot of good one-on-one interaction with like your main character and Paimon and whoever the new characters are and stuff like that in the story. But with this really rich, big cast of characters, you want to see their personalities kind of bounce off each other. And particularly, Liyue just hadn't had that because in Mondstadt, all the characters are kind of organized around the Favonius Knights. And Liyue doesn't quite have, like, everyone feels off. They're off in their own little corner. So for the Cooking Festival, you finally got to just, like, run around and go talk to people. And all the characters are in, like, little groups and pairs. And so you finally get to see stuff that I've always wanted to see, like Beidou and Ningguang talking to each other, because those characters have all this cool lore, but you never actually see them talk. And so you have that. But in the background of all those dialogue scenes, you have Guoba, who is Xiangling's little panda dude, who is part of her elemental skill, that she throws him out and he shoots fire. And that's it. He's like a little kind of joke mascotty character. And then they had Guoba running around in the back of these cutscenes, like just doing little funny, goofy stuff. And I was like, oh, that's really cute. That's funny. Like someone at MiHoYo must have had the funny idea of just to sprinkle Guoba around. And then slowly, as you go through the event, he becomes more and more central to what's happening, until eventually you find out that the entire festival is to celebrate Guoba in his previous incarnation as a god, because he is actually the god of the stove, one of the ancient gods of Liyue, who he, like, split in the ancient days of this, like, nation. He split himself from these little raccoon dudes who ran around, and he invented this, like, brand new, like, innovative meal that was, like, warm, and you could like, I forget what the name of it is, but you could, like, take it around. It was, like, this really easy, nutritious meal to make, and he kept people safe. But he did that for hundreds of years, and eventually he slowly lost his power and his sense of himself until he went to sleep in a little shrine. And that's where a little girl Xiangling that you can see in the cutscene goes, and she finds him there and puts like a little like offering of that meal on the pedestal. And Guoba wakes up and then joins her. And she thinks he's just a funny little animal that's like a pet, but actually he's an ancient god who's been looking over Liyue and watching over them the entire time. And the cutscene that plays is like a 3-minute cutscene that shows the history of Guoba, and then it transitions into modern day Liyue and going through every single character you've met throughout the festival and the major characters of Liyue as they are going about their modern day lives, and drawing that direct connection between the sacrifice that Guoba had in the history to all these people you know now. And it is like, it is one of the most emotional moments I've had playing a game this entire year, because it's like, the little panda dudes has been with me the entire time. Like, he gave us all of this. I couldn't believe that they had pulled that like narrative feat off.
It's unbelievable, Sean. It's like, And it's one of the things that is so special about Genshin Impact is it's got so many corners of its world already, just a little over 1 year in, that it can just spin this amazing little story about your little bear friend who spits fire out. And it's one of the best pieces of narrative I've seen in any game this or any other year. It's unbelievable. Yeah. I remember my brother played that stretch of it first, and he told me, hey, you got to make sure you do this cooking event because he just said, the ending's going to surprise you. And I'm like, okay. And I was like kind of looking out for like, what's it going to be? And the ending will surprise you does not prepare you for Swoba is the god of the stove. Like that is, the ending will surprise you as like, oh, this character, I didn't expect them to be here, not Guoba's a god. Oh my god, I love these crazy people who make this game. It's so good.
And now, like, every time I use Xiangling, I feel completely different. Like, I just will never look at her and Guoba the same way. Especially because at the end of that whole event, you have that great little scene where Zhongli shows up, and it's the only time he's shown up in the event. You've kept on waiting for him because he's like one of the best Liyue characters. And he shows up, and it's him and Madame Po and Guoba have a little conversation. It's like, oh my god, this is so good. But then other stuff that they added this year, because the Genshin Impact train never fucking stops. Here's some of the unique mechanical things that they have done to Genshin Impact this year. They added a tower defense game, Theater Mechanicus, that have popped up 2 times, and they're bringing back another time, I think, in the next update. And the tower defense game is fucking awesome. There's a rhythm mini game that has been in a couple of the events that you could win. Like if you completed them, you got a little like instrument that you could play. There are 2 instruments that you could have from those events now, and there are like tons of YouTube videos of people like, because it's kind of like the Ocarina and Ocarina of Time. You can just like play whatever notes and whatever, and so there are a bunch of people with the PC version of the game that have YouTube videos of them playing fucking like Dragon Force songs and shit like that with like the lyre in Genshin Impact, and it's great. They added out the hangout events, or the dating event mechanics, and there are now 10 of those in total, which are just like little visual novel inspired hangouts that you can do with a bunch of the characters that usually aren't majorly featured in other places of the story. And they're really cool little things that have multiple different paths you can go on, and those are super fun. They had a hide and seek multiplayer mode inspired by the Gmod game Prop Hunt that they are bringing back. I only played it a little bit, but it was like I can't believe that they fucking put a Prop Hunt game in here for like a week. That's crazy. They added in the Serenity Pot, which is an entire player housing mechanic, where they have also now added all the Inazuma elements of the Serenity Pot as well, where you can go to these like regions and build up these houses. You can put your characters in the Serenity Pot, and there's a bunch of unique dialogue that you can go and you can talk to them and hang out with them. They've allowed you to put Paimon in the Serenity Pot as well, and you can go and talk to Paimon, and that's a great fucking time because Paimon's the best. And so there's all of that you can get sucked into. They added a boat to the game, so you can pilot a boat now and go around in the ocean, and there's a bunch of like different boating style events they've done. They added cosmetic outfits. There are only 4 of them now. They just added one for Ningguang and Keiching, but you can get custom outfits, and they're all really good. Like, they're really elaborate new outfits. There is a gardening mechanic. That's not super in-depth, but you can garden, and you can get different resources in your Serenity Part by gardening. A shout out to just like the 1,000 different puzzle mechanics they added into the Inazuma region, because they like are not reusing old puzzle mechanics. They are coming up constantly with new puzzle mechanics, and all of the mechanics in exploring the Inazuma region are new. They did not reuse any of the same kinds of things that they did in Liyue and Mondstadt, which is amazing. They've added fishing to the game, so you can fish now. It's not as much fun, I would say, as the Tales of Rise one, mostly because the Tales of Rise one has a bunch of specific story around it, but it is still a fun fishing game. It is a good, very relaxing time.
I spent so much time with it, and it's one of the best uses of the DualSense's adaptive triggers is the fishing in Genshin Impact. Mwah. I don't know how you play that I don't know how like PC or players play that. It's crazy.
Yes, yeah, it is a really good use of the DualSense controller. They also added in a roguelike kind of labyrinth area that they did in one of the recent events that they're bringing back pretty soon, because it was really fun. And that was like a really cool new event thing and they've done a bunch of those, but that is like kind of the one I think where they've cracked the more combat focused event that puts a cool twist on it. You can catch pets now to put into your Serenity Pot. So any small animals in the world, you can now catch them and you can put them in your Serenity Pot, which is really cool. And there are also now customizable snowmen that you can also put in your Serenity Pot that you got through the Snow Festival. So that is just a sample of the new additional mechanical things that they have put into the game over the course of this past year, because it's not just new areas and new stories and new characters. It is also just, now you can fish, now there's houses, you can play a tower defense game. It's fucking crazy. It's basically every video game in one. And all of I've talked about isn't even touching on the fact that they added in the entire Inazuma region, which is 5 islands. Now there's actually a 6th area they've just added to the game that I haven't really explored much yet, because they only added it like 2 days ago. But they've added a whole new additional playable area, and this was, of course, like the centerpiece of this year for Genshin Impact. This is where they had to prove themselves that they could, reasonably put out a big new explorable area that felt as satisfying as Mondstadt and Liyue were, and at like the same level of content. And I think that they've done even better. I think Inazuma is the best section of the game.
Yes.
I think the piecemeal release strategy of it, of giving you a big like first half bit early on, and then giving you smaller chunks in later updates, so that you can kind of like, when it feels like you're done exploring and you've managed to sort of settle a little bit and go do some other stuff, with like other games, and kind of don't spend a huge amount of time in Genshin Impact, and then at a good cadence a new big explorable area comes out. I think that was a really smart choice, instead of trying to just dump it all at once. And just the sense of exploring the world, how fun the new puzzle mechanics were, all the cool smaller stories that are told throughout all those islands, because every island has its own kind of bigger side quest chain that tells one big story about the history of that island. And the overall world building of Inazuma is the coolest region, because I love how fragmented the history is, because it is this group of, kind of like similar to like historical Japan, different islands with different cultures and histories and peoples that all kind of think about events in their history in slightly different ways, and engaging with that history, which is much more recent for them, relatively speaking, than like what Liyue, where history feels like it's ancient. Inazuma, like the ruins of the traumatic elements of the history and the past of that region, are still very apparent, like in front of you in the world. And that is such a cool dynamic, and it's such an interesting contrast from the previous 2 areas, where you can feel how scarred the land of Inazuma is still from like the wars of the past couple of hundred years. And it is just one of the coolest areas you can explore in any open world game. And I think that they have certainly proved themselves capable of keeping up and improving on even the level of quality that they maintained in what was already my favorite game of the last year.
Sean, I want to second all of this, and for Inazuma specifically, episode 387 this year was our Genshin Impact 2.0 episode. Episode 393 was our Genshin Impact 2.1 episode, so we talked about Inazuma extensively, and I'm glad we did, because it's truly one of the coolest things to come out this year. Genshin Impact, I explained my reasoning for not, because it just, for me, it would just overshadow, because I agree 100% with you, Sean. It's not that I moved it somewhere else because I like it less than you. It's because for me, it is the best game being put out right now. And but it is not just a game, it's an ongoing thing that kind of scrambles my existing understanding of what a game is. And I mean that in the best way possible. And I've been off the Genshin Impact train a little bit, because I have a little bit of trouble going all or nothing with this game. So it's so funny you listed all those mechanics. And I was playing Genshin Impact daily for like most of this year, but I've been off for like 6 weeks, and there's a bunch of stuff in there I'm like, what are you talking about, snowmen in the fucking... It's so funny how quickly they add stuff. And here's the other thing I love about it, though, is that it's not like Destiny or something where it would be fucking impossible for me to get back into Destiny now. If I want to jump into Genshin Impact tonight, it will be a very welcoming thing where I will have things to do, and I won't feel like the game abandoned me in my short time away, right? And that's one of the best things about it.
Yeah, and now actually would be a good time to jump back into it for this update, because they have added a new explorable area in Konomiya, and they've also done their first like interim chapter. There's like a big Liyue chapter that's kind of like almost like an epilogue to some of the Liyue stuff, and it's very good.
Nice.
And the new character Shunhe, who is played by Kawasumi Ayako in the Japanese version, who is Saber from the Fate series. She is very cool. I don't have her yet, but I hope I can get her, because I really like that character a lot. And she's in her kit is like, if you like playing as Ayaka and you like Cryo, Shunha's like character design is, in terms of her like mechanics, is entirely about buffing other Cryo characters. And I've seen some videos of people like putting teams together, and like her and Ayaka seem like an incredibly fun combination of characters to play. So that is
absolutely. My brother it's so funny, he was here for the last couple weeks, and he was playing Genshin Impact on his iPad every day, and he was also like, I saw him, he's like his like YouTube recommends are just a sea of Genshin videos of people analyzing team compositions, and it's so fun. I love it. And I'm still I gotta say, my big hope for 2022 is I just need to know when we're getting Donslafe as a playable character, because that's Kenjiro Tsuda, and like that's the guy I need on my team. I need my Seto Kaiba boy on my team. He's in a lot of other stuff too, obviously, but we saw him a lot between Liyue and Inazuma, and I hope we see him again soon.
I hope so as well. And to wrap up Genshin Impact here, I want to give it, this is a continuation of a award I gave it last year. Last year I gave it the Game I Needed award because it came out at the end of that fall semester, which was the semester where I had to deal with teaching hybrid with COVID, like at the schools and all that kind of stuff. And it was like the most crazy fucking shit in my entire life. And I'm going to update that award and give it Genshin Impact 2021 the Game I Still Need award, because the world hasn't gotten notably better. And I still need my like comfort food, which Genshin Impact, it can both be your comfort food and it can also be your like 3-course meal, depending on where the updates are, where you're at with playing it, and its ability to be like all things to all people, which is necessary for a live service game like that, is the thing that's most impressive about it. And I have high expectations and hopes that Genshin Impact will continue to be an amazing game continuing into 2022.
That's so true. I don't know if I can point to another game that is that clearly it can be your comfort food, it can be your little snack every day, or it can be your, this is all I'm playing right now, 3-course meal every night.
Yeah.
That is I think that more than anything might be the magic of this game, and it is the amazing thing about it. So I think it is a perfectly fitting number one for you, Sean, and I'm glad we got to talk about it here, because it is one of the most significant things going on in the whole world of gaming right now.
Yes, it is. But, Jonathan, that was my number one. I think I have a very, very, very good idea about what your number one is, but let's see if I'm right. Jonathan, take it away with your number one game of 2021.
My number one game is Metroid Dread.
What? No way!
Because here, I'll give it an award, Sean. The, oh my god, they made me a game award.
Yes, that's a good award.
Because Metroid Dread, in addition to, it's not just it's a new Metroid game, it's a new 2D Metroid game, not a remake or anything like that. It is a brand new, it is Metroid 5. They literally announced it on stage at the Nintendo Direct as Metroid 5, the direct sequel to Metroid Fusion, which is 20 years old this year in 2022. So it's been a long fucking time. And they released it on my birthday, October 8th. My 29th birthday. They gave me a Metroid game for my birthday. Sean, I had a really good birthday this year. Yep. I went out with friends to see the new James Bond movie, which was great. They gave me a James Bond movie for my birthday, and it was really good. Had dinner with my friends, went home, loaded up Metroid Dread, and got to end my birthday playing not just a new Metroid game, not just a good new Metroid game, but I think the best 2D Metroid game, and with time, it could just be the best Metroid game. Its competition would be Metroid Prime, and I think I still lean towards Prime, but I think Dread is an amazing thing. This was developed by Mercury Steam. They are the people who made Metroid Samus Returns, which is the 3DS game that was a remake, kind of a reimagining of the original Metroid 2 for the Game Boy, and it is such a cool thing they've done here. This is the revival of a project that had been talked about since the early days of the Nintendo DS. That was when the game Metroid Dread, there are old issues of Nintendo Power with the words Metroid Dread in them. It was always planned to be the furthest point along the Metroid timeline we'd ever gone to, kind of the culmination of Samus's journey so far. And they brought it back. They gave it to Mercury Steam, who so clearly proved themselves on Metroid Samus Returns. And, Nintendo really put their weight behind this one. It's a big premium $60 package. It had by far the biggest marketing campaign I think Metroid has had probably since Prime 1. Like, this had a really big push behind it. It sold really well. Metroid got the Switch bump, which, yes, thank God, that means we're getting more Metroid, hopefully. In every way, I think Nintendo seemed committed to proving that Metroid was back and was relevant and was a real ongoing thing, which is important because, the Metroidvania genre, as we like to call it, even though it should just be the Metroid genre. No disrespect to Castlevania, but something invented it, and it was Metroid. That genre is like an omnipresent thing now. It has its tendrils in so many aspects of game design, from a lot of like the sort of indie darlings like Hollow Knight that have taken that and kind of brought it to the next level, to things like Dark Souls that are very much built off of like the 3D kind of Metroidvania thing that Metroid Prime really brought to the fore, and then, you know, combining a different kind of like challenge aspect to it. But I think bringing back Metroid in its original 2D, you know, side-scrolling form and proving its relevance is one of the coolest things Nintendo could do, and Metroid Dread is cream of the crop Metroid. It is to this series what I think Sonic Mania was to Sonic, the long-awaited sequel to this beloved 2D lineage that feels like it fell out of a parallel timeline where we never stopped making these things. And so the visual design and the mechanics have all evolved here by leaps and bounds within the original formula. And I think the key here really is the developers at Mercury Steam, who really proved themselves on that 3DS game, and they kick it up into full gear here, getting to make a Metroid all their own. They take mechanics that worked great in their 3DS game, like the free aiming, the melee, the combat counters, and they sort of put away ones that didn't. It's a really good, like, it's kind of that, like, almost like Mass Effect 2 kind of sequel, where it's like, it has a really clear sense of what was great and what needed a little bit of improvement and what you can just ditch. And it has all of that. And then it just is freely inventing all over the place with bold and fun new ideas. It rearranges and sort of challenges your expectations throughout, such as keeping the morph ball out of your hands for a giant chunk of the adventure. And overall, just the control of this game is a fucking wonder to behold. Samus has never moved better in 2D or in 3D than she does here. Okay, my dog Phoebe,
Yeah.
She must love Metroid because she is barking up a storm. She's like, let me in here, let me talk about Metroid. Sorry, Phoebe. Anyway, the basic gameplay loop is so ludicrously tight and fun that I just didn't want to stop playing this game. It's the kind of game that's so damn fun to play, to manipulate the controls and see what happens on screen, that even if you're not doing anything in particular, you just have so much fun with it. I think that, combined with the really good in-game map system, made this easily the most fun I've ever had doing a 100% run on a Metroid game. So Samus Returns had this thing where you sort of ran around the map, and you had an omnipresent, I think you hit like down on the D-pad or something, and it would scan and it would sort of reveal what was around you. And that was cool, but it almost made some of the collection a little trivial and kind of repetitive because it would put all this stuff on your map. I think this game does a much better job of helping you find things, like subtly guiding you without making it sort of that sort of repetitive and automatic. And the result is it's a game that you can 100% without... I never needed to look up a guide for where anything was. Not because they made it trivial, but because it's just so well designed. And it's so fun to move around the game. And they've taken away the like bad kinds of friction that make it hard to like revisit areas and that kind of stuff. But anyway, like I said, the 100% part is fun. But just going through the whole game itself, I think you put all of this into such an intricately designed world, where Mercury Steam has really gone for the whole hog Metroid experience, where it is a big, non-linear, open-ended, mysterious, and very minimally directed journey that tells you where to go indirectly through context clues, through visual storytelling. It's really the kind of like what I think of as like the true Metroid experience design that few ever attempt and fewer still pull off. You know, even Metroid itself has pulled back from it. I think Fusion is more linear. Samus Returns is sort of like a series of Metroid areas that don't necessarily connect like in a backtracking sense that much. Metroid Prime 3 sort of did the same thing. Dark Souls did it in Dark Souls 1, and then Dark Souls 2 kind of went back to everything's cordoned off from each other kind of sense, because it's a really, really tough thing to do, this full whole hog Metroid kind of thing where it's a big world that you explore, but you kind of go in loops through. And I think Mercury Steam just does it beautifully here with these visually arresting areas that all feel part of a continuous world with a real grounded logic to how everything fits together and why and how you move between and within places. Plus, it just nails that sense of atmosphere and the music that really fuels that atmosphere that is such a staple of Metroid to me, is that when Metroid is at its best, no game drips with atmosphere more than these games, and I think they really nailed it here with a story that's shockingly good and substantial. It doesn't have to lean too heavily on dialogue. It doesn't make Samus into someone she isn't. It doesn't have her talk. In fact, I think they get Samus better than maybe any other Metroid game. Her characterization in the cutscenes here it very firmly returns her to the top of the video game character kingdom. This is a medium full of badasses, but Samus's ass is the baddest. This game reminds us over and over again. It is very cool. It really has a culmination to it, I think, a sense that, like, this doesn't have to be the last Metroid game ever made or anything like that, but it does reward that sense that this is the furthest along the timeline. We're at the far end of a big journey Samus has been on, where we had all the Metroid Prime stuff happened, she's exterminated all the Metroids, the events of Super Metroid happened, and there's a couple of big twists that happen in the final act about her relationship to the Chozo and the Metroids, and what kind of happens to her body near the end of the game that very much makes up for the 20-year wait between Fusion and this game. It is so fucking cool. And I think it all helps that this is a challenging, like genuinely challenging game. Not quite to the level of like a Dark Souls or something, but with similar instincts kicking in on the boss fights, which are, I think, easily the series' all-time best. The final boss in particular is just a masterclass in how to do this sort of thing right. So I am probably rambling a little bit. Any new, real, genuine Metroid game probably makes my top 10, but this game isn't number one just because it's Metroid and I like Metroid. This gets the I like Metroid award. I'll give it that one. This game is number one because of the games that I chose to, like, you know, count for 2021. This was the best I played this year. I don't think there's even really a question. It's this and Resident Evil Village were like the two sort of pillars, and then a lot of other stuff I really loved. But those two, and I think Metroid Dread in particular, just, I wouldn't have thought at the start of this year to even ask for a game like this, and that Nintendo did their thing where they just made it in secret and then announced it and put it out. I really like when they do that. And this is, you know, my favorite game that has been published on the Switch since the Switch debuted with Breath of the Wild. I would put this in Breath of the Wild as the best Switch exclusives. If you've never played Metroid, I don't know if this is the best one to jump in with, but it's definitely accessible, and it recaps the story and all of that. And yeah, it just, you know, Metroid game design philosophies have come to dominate the medium in all sorts of ways, and it's really cool to see the genuine article sort of back on top here at the end of the year. And they gave it to me for my birthday, so thank you. That was a really cool birthday present, Nintendo. Now, if you could figure out your N64 bullshit on the Switch Online stuff, that'd be great too, but I don't care about that. You gave me Metroid. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I just remember, because I think it was their, like, basically E3-ish Nintendo Direct, right? It was their, like, summer Nintendo Direct where they announced the game, and I just remember watching that and being like, awesome for Jonathan. Like, there's, like, you know, maybe one day I'll play this. I don't know. I mean, I do like Metroid, but I'm not obsessive about it, but I saw it, like, yeah, Jonathan's gonna be fucking happy about this one. And then I just, like, October's like, that's like right around Jonathan's birthday. It's like, oh no, that's literally Jonathan's birthday. Holy shit. It's like when the fucking Day of the Doctor 50th anniversary Doctor Who thing was like, oh yeah, that's my birthday. This is a cool thing to just, like, the world just, you know, confluences just happened, and it just turns out a thing you really like happens on your birthday, and it's just like the world somehow gave you a birthday present, which is something we all need to happen every now and then.
It's very cool, and, you know, we're getting Metroid Prime 4 at some point in the maybe distant, maybe not too distant future.
Who knows? I'm so curious what that game's going to be.
I know, but we're gonna, you know, that's in production by Retro, which is cool. And given the sales of Dread, I'd be surprised if they don't have Mercury Steam come back and do something more with it, because I think there's a lot of juice left in this, and they're a very talented developer. So
I would expect it, because this is their second Metroid game, right? Because they did the remake of 2. So yeah, I would assume that. Were I Nintendo, I would certainly say, yeah, keep on making this, because they don't seem like they would be the highest budget games. You know, like, I'm sure they're not, like, cheap or whatever, but they're not making fucking Red Dead Redemption 2 or some shit. It seems like a good way to keep a segment of the fan base that Nintendo has, which is like the Metroid people that are often kind of a little bit ignored. You know, they don't have it as bad as the F-Zero people, but they certainly don't have it as good as the Zelda or Mario people. And it's like, keep those people happy, because the Metroid people are like the hardcore Nintendo people in my eyes. Like, it's always like the people who Metroid is like one of their favorite Nintendo things. It's like they are like hardcore Nintendo fuckers. Give them what they deserve. They deserve good Metroid games. The world needs it.
I am indeed a hardcore Nintendo fucker.
Yes.
But yes, do you want to really quickly recap our top 10s, Sean?
All right, let's do it. So my number 10. So with recording this podcast so long, my mouse went to sleep. My number 10 is Persona 5 Strikers.
My number 10 is Unpacking.
My number 9 is Neo 2.
My number 9 is Guardians of the Galaxy.
My number 8 is Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart.
My number 8 is Halo Infinite.
My number 7 is Hitman 3.
My number 7 is Hitman 3.
My number 6 is Tales of Arise.
My number 6 is Bowser's Fury.
My number 5 is Resident Evil 8-age, or Village, or 8, whichever you prefer.
My number 5 is Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart.
My number 4 is Returnal.
My number 4 is Cyber Shadow.
My number 3 is Yakuza 7, Like a Dragon.
My number 3 is Forza Horizon. No, my number 3 was My number 4 was Forza Horizon 5, and my number 3 is Cyber Shadow. I had those in the wrong order.
I don't know how you fucked that up. My number 2 is Lost Judgment.
My number 2 is Resident Evil Village.
And my number 1, always and forever, is Genshin Impact for the year 2021.
And my number 1 is Metroid Dread.
There's some good video games that came out this year, Jonathan. And some good video games that came out last year that I played this year. And some good video games that came out last year and continue to be coming out this year also.
I mean, obviously, this was a slower year for video games because
Yeah.
of the pandemic, and this is when we kind of felt that, the new-gen consoles could not get into that many people's hands, so all of that kind of slowed down. But I think especially, we recorded 3.5 hours plus here. This was a great year. This is a lot of good video games, and I'm really happy to go down memory lane on them. I did also want to remind people, if you wanted to hear my top 10 films of the year list, I did do that. It was out in the podcast feed last week as a solo episode, and it was me reading a written piece I wrote, but you can also listen to it in the podcast feed, so that is there for you as well.
Yeah, and it's a good list. I like that.
Thank you. And next week, we're going to talk about something. I'm not sure what.
Something happened next week. There's a lot of things we can do. We still got like 1,000 fucking buns in the oven, basically, on this podcast, and something will come out of one of them.
I think this is going to be a really good year for the podcast, Sean. We're going to hit the 10th year anniversary of the podcast, the 3rd year anniversary of Weekly Suit Gundam. We're going to come full circle on Weekly Suit Gundam. We've got all sorts of projects and a lot of irons in the fire, and I think it is going to be a really cool year for the Weekly Stuff podcast.
I 100% agree. Now I want to go play some Genshin Impact because I haven't done my dailies yet.